Daily Matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 5th of April.
Tory sex trap. Senior Conservative MP William Ragg has admitted his involvement in a honey trap sexting scandal targeting several MPs and a political journalist. GB News has exclusive access to messages sent by the honey trap account.
Civil servants walk out. Civil servants could refuse to work over fears they could be complicit in war crimes in Gaza if Israel's found to have broken international law. Their union is considering taking legal action against the government.
Brexit victory? Britain has been named the second most powerful country in the world by the Global Soft Power Index. Has Brexit Britain actually exceeded expectations?
Well, this is a story that is rocking Westminster. Westminster currently in recess, of course, but there's very little else being spoken about amongst people in positions of power today. That is, of course, the honey trap, honey pot scandal, whereby over a dozen senior figures in Westminster have been receiving flirtatious, unsolicited messages from an account that may well have not been who they said they were.
Yes, and we're going to have a bit of a huge exclusive actually coming up after the news bulletins. We will reveal all, but of course there are many questions about William Ragg, many questions. Firstly, who's been targeting MPs? Secondly, why would male MPs be so stupid, so careless, so foolish to even indulge conversations coming from unknown numbers, coming from randomers, essentially? And what should happen to such Tory MPs? What should happen to William Ragg if he was sending over colleagues' numbers to just a random bloke he met on a dating app? The mind boggles.
It must be said that MPs' numbers do find them ways into many people's phone books. Perhaps the real issue here is that members of Parliament were seeing messages and not treating them with the suspicion that they should have.
I know, they have training on this stuff. They're told to be suspicious. They're told to be careful. They're told people will be targeting them, including hostile states. I mean, really, how foolish can you be? But yes, we're going to have a big GB News exclusive after
Absolutely. Stay with us. We'll be asking you the question, would you fall for these messages after we show them? But that's, of course, after your headlines with Ray.
Good afternoon. Almost 3 minutes past 12, our top stories this hour. A sexting scandal rocking Westminster has been described as cause for concern by the Chancellor. That's after Conservative MP William Ragg admitted his involvement, telling The Times that he'd sent intimate pictures of himself to someone on a gay dating app and was then manipulated into handing over the personal phone numbers of colleagues. Jeremy Hunt says MPs and members of the public need to be careful about their cyber security.
Well, I think the events of the last few days have been a great cause for concern. The MP involved has given a courageous and fulsome apology, But the lesson here for all MPs is that they need to be very careful about cyber security. And indeed, it's the lesson for members of the public as well, because this is something that we are all having to face in our daily lives.
Millions of people will receive a boost in take-home pay from tomorrow following a cut to employee national insurance. From the start of the new tax year, Class 1 contributions will be reduced from 10 to 8%. Meanwhile, a further 2 million self-employed people will see their Class 4 national insurance reduced from 8 to 6%. The government says around 29 million workers will benefit from these changes. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says taxes are actually going up.
While they say tomorrow that taxes are going down, all of the numbers show that taxes are on the rise. Taxes today are at a 70-year high, and they're due to increase in every single year of the forecast period. In fact, by the end of the forecast, the average British family would be paying £870 more in tax because of the frozen national insurance and income tax threshold, and because of increases in council tax too. That is the Conservatives' double whammy on tax.
Well, consultants will be paying more national insurance. They've accepted a pay offer from the government, ending a year-long dispute. The British Medical Association says 83% of members in England voted in favour of the offer, which is an improvement on one rejected earlier on this year. Consultants have taken strike action over the past 12 months, adding to the NHS waiting list, which has also been affected by the junior doctors' dispute, which remains unresolved. New powers to prevent disruptive protests come into force today, with offenders facing up to 6 months in prison or an unlimited fine. Serious disruption prevention orders can now be used to stop repeat offenders from joining protest groups in a particular area at particular times. Home Secretary James Cleverly says these powers will target those who are, quote, dedicated to wreaking havoc. However, civil liberties organisation Liberty is describing it as a shameless attempt to prevent people from being able to make their voices heard. Parts of the country have no train service today due to a fresh strike by drivers, as left union members have walked out and mounted picket lines in their long-running dispute over pay. 5 train operators are involved, including Avanti, Cross Country and West Midlands Railway. They say they're not running any services. A ban on overtime at 16 companies is also continuing into tomorrow. Israel has announced that it's opening new routes for humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza after warnings from US President Biden. The Erez crossing is being opened for the first time since the Hamas terror attacks in October. Officials also say they're planning to increase the amount of aid from Jordan moving through the Kerem Shalom crossing. In a call with Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu, President Biden said that future US support for the country depends on steps taken to protect civilians and aid workers. Well, staying with Israel, and fast food chain McDonald's is taking back ownership of its restaurants in the country. The firm is buying back its 30-year-old franchise of over 225 outlets from Aloniel Limited, which employs more than 5,000 people. The American company has been subject to boycotts and protests since Aloniel began donating free meals to Israel's military shortly after the Hamas attacks. McDonald's will own the restaurants and retain the employees as part of the deal, they say. The King has reportedly told aides to ramp up plans for a 2-week state visit down under. King Charles is said to be over the moon and raring to go after his cancer treatment started positively. The 75-year-old is said to be feeling optimistic after he was able to meet with the public on Easter Sunday. He's reportedly told aides that he is supercharging plans to also visit New Zealand and Samoa. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, back to Tom and Emily and that scoop.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 12. Now, for a GB News exclusive. Following senior figures in Westminster finding their mobile phone numbers shared and unsolicited flirtatious messages sent to their personal phones, GB News has today been given exclusive access to the Westminster honeypot messages. First, this is how the honey trap worked. A message would be sent pretending to have known the recipient. In this instance, an account identifying itself as Charlie said, "Was sad not to bump into you over conference season. It's been too long." This was followed up by the flirtatious message, "Do I need to do something better to grab your attention?" Now, GB News understands messages were sent over a period spanning 5 months. Here we see persistent messages. "Hey, how are you? Sorry, accident. Hey, we not gonna pick this up then?" Now, we understand that well over a dozen figures in Westminster have been targeted in this way. But just to repeat, this is how they were targeted.
So from an unknown number, someone out of the blue drops a line to an MP or a political journalist saying, "Oh, saw you around, nice to bump into you, how are you, whatever." No response, continues. Now, I don't know about you, Tom, but when I get a message out of the blue from an unknown number, I am automatically suspicious.
Yeah.
I automatically feel, you know what? I'm probably not going to respond to that. At best, I'd probably say, "Who's this?" And if there's no adequate response, then you just ignore and block. But what we're seeing here is that potentially our politicians, who are supposed to be sensible, who are given training on what to avoid and not to look foolish, have actually responded and indulged messages like this and potentially shared indecent images.
That's right. The Times is saying that 2 members of Parliament have shared indecent images in this way. And it's easy to see, looking at the content of these messages, how they could have done that, thinking that this is someone that they might have met, might have known. The way in which these messages are written certainly is designed
but come on, as an
to show
MP,
that.
probably you should leave sending indecent photos in the past. If you're a public figure, why on earth would you share a picture of yourself in a compromising position?
Someone
I mean,
with whom you don't know you're talking
I mean,
to.
seriously. And then William Ragg, apparently so scared that someone could, share photos of him, that he would then pass colleagues' numbers.
Yes, although the reason William Ragg has not had the whip withdrawn from him is he's also being considered to some extent as a victim in this at this stage. But let's discuss this.
Yes, the police investigation is looking at who was trying to target him rather than him doing anything illegal.
But let's get more with our GB News political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, this is a pretty shocking story that is rippling through Westminster.
That's right. Hi, Tom. Hi, Emily. Yeah, it certainly is. It's been taken very, very seriously by the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. He wrote to MPs last night. I've got the letter here in my hand. It says here that the Parliamentary Security Department is working closely with partners in government, who I understand to be security experts, to analyse and understand the nature of these messages and any related security risk. And he would stress that it's unwise to speculate about their origin at this stage. Clearly, there is a concern it could be a foreign state actor targeting MPs who may be prone to responding to messages. We know William Ragg has had mental health issues in the past. He's been open about those issues, talked about them, has had lots of sympathy from other MPs. Earlier today, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, had this to say about Mr Ragg.
Well, I think the events of the last few days have been a great cause for concern. The MP involved has given a courageous and fulsome apology, but the lesson here for all MPs is that they need to be very careful about cyber security, and indeed it's the lesson for members of the public as well, because this is something that we are all having to face in our daily lives.
That's Jeremy Hunt there talking about William Ragg. Now, William Ragg, I understand, is in Greater Manchester in his constituency. He'll be spoken to this afternoon by those experts in Parliament and government to understand how many other numbers he gave out, a dozen or so. I also understand from senior sources that more are coming forward as we speak. So this issue is growing, not subsiding.
Chris, it seems to me that Jeremy Hunt was very generous there, saying that he gave a courageous and fulsome apology. I mean, this is an MP who has been handing out his colleagues' numbers, potentially bringing Parliament into disrepute. I'm sure a lot of people would consider that perhaps this would be a matter to take away the whip from him. Why do you suppose there's so much generosity from the likes of Hunt?
I think it's because, Emily, he's well known, he's liked in Parliament, he's a senior Tory MP, Vice Chairman of the 1922 Committee. He did issue a statement last night to the Times in which he said they had some compromising things on me, they wouldn't leave me alone, I've hurt people by being weak, I was scared, I'm mortified, I'm so sorry my weakness has caused other people hurt. He's made very clear that it was a weak moment. I mean, I think everyone is subject to this pressure, and how we deal with it is up to us. And some people find it harder to resist pressure. Obviously, you know, I mean, he found himself giving out details he never should have done to random strangers. That's clearly totally wrong. I think Jeremy Hunt was allowing himself to see the human behind this issue, and William Bragg has had time off from Parliament to deal with mental health issues. That's well known by MPs, and I think that's Jeremy Hunt trying to say, we understand he's under pressure, and he has said sorry. But you're right when you said there the advice is always don't respond to unsolicited text messages. It could be anybody trying to get in touch. As I understand it, sources tell me, very senior sources in the Commons say, it looks unlikely this was a foreign actor, but as I say, the Commons authorities are using all the assets in the state to examine whether it was a country trying to exploit weak Tory MPs or MPs at all.
Well, very interesting indeed. Thank you, Christopher Hope, our political editor.
Well, let's get some more on this with the thoughts of political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal. James, just how many people do we think this might have affected?
Well, you mentioned there, Tom, at the beginning of the programme about a dozen or so. I've heard a similar number. And I think what's quite striking, it wasn't just, of course, MPs, Conservative MPs, there's also other people involved, different levels in Parliament, staff members as well. So this was an attempt to kind of really sort of put out there sort of machine gun approach, different types of people out there. And it wasn't just parliamentarians who might have had access to more sensitive stuff, but also people lower down the food chain in Westminster as well.
James, do we understand that it was only male MPs that were targeted? And what does that say about them?
Well, my understanding is that I've only heard of men being targeted by this. Perhaps this shows the way in which men were seen as more likely targets for these kind of attempted honey trapping involvements. Traditionally, it's men and male politicians in Westminster. You go back through the past 50, 100 years or so throughout the Cold War who were targeted in these kind of things. But also, I think perhaps a level of the predominance of Westminster is men as well. So I think perhaps choosing the effective targets, looking at sort of honey trapping history, and hearing the names that have been involved in all this kind of stuff, also point to more male involvement in this than women.
Now, of course, there's a long history in Westminster, as you allude to, of honey traps by foreign state actors. In this instance, perhaps it's not a foreign state actor, perhaps it is, but it could be someone trying to extort people for money, for influence, or even for sexual gratification.
Absolutely, and as you say, Tom, there's a whole history of that. I've just finished reading Closet Queens, which is a great book about sort of homosexuals in politics previously. And there's a case, for instance, when Robert Boothby in the 1960s was blackmailed by the Cray twins. That was one case where there was a criminal element, a domestic criminal element involved there. Obviously, maybe some of you have seen last year the John Stonehouse documentary in which he was blackmailed by Eastern Bloc agents. He was a Labour MP in the 1970s. So foreign state actors, but also domestic actors as well, are involved in this. There's also cases where, you get kind of domestic rows and things like that, and people's own partners get involved for kind of own sexual gratification. We don't know more. I'm sure more details will emerge over the coming weeks or so, but it's a reminder yet again of the importance of cybersecurity and coming at a time when the UK government, I know, is preparing things like the Defending Democracy Task Force for the kind of national elections to ensure they can't be targeted by foreign state actors. It's a reminder that it can be as simple as passing on a known phone number to someone else. That can also lead to the downfall of people's careers and lots of shame and ignominy as well.
I mean, this could do potential damage to people's personal relationships if some of these MPs who have been involved in these conversations with these numbers, potentially sending pictures and the like, and if they happen to be married or have children and things, this could have huge ramifications, couldn't it, for some of these MPs? potentially?
Absolutely, and I think it leads on to an interesting debate about changing norms involving our MPs and blackmail. I think in this case, Will Wragg has made a miscalculation. And I think you've seen there from Jeremy Hunt's comments about how courageous his statement was. I think actually what Wragg could have done was just be honest about the fact that he had these pictures were out there and the messages, etc. Because people I don't think they care as much as they used to. And I think that's about changing norms around social media. But also, he was the victim of this. And I think that was a mistake. I not actually think that people would immediately sympathise with him on this because, I think this stuff is going to be more and more of a feature of political life over the next 10, 20 years or so. And we ought to try and learn the lessons of this. And, if people are getting blackmailed, to go to the police straight away and point this out, because obviously it's clearly not on, it's illegal and needs to be stamped out of public life.
Yes, it seems that sometimes people try and control it themselves and in doing so actually spread it out into further things. Although, James, just finally, I suppose if William Wragg didn't hand out these phone numbers, people could have got members of Parliament's phone numbers through any sort of means.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's still quite a lot of information about MPs and their residences in terms of electoral law, actually, online and offline as well. And there are many things. I think it just shows that, again, Westminster needs to make sure it's being very careful in its use of information and to ensure that we kind of minimise these sort of leaks as much as possible.
Well, James Heal, political correspondent at The Spectator, thank you very much for your time.
Surely he could have gone to, the parliamentary party, gone to a colleague, gone to the whip, and actually,
this is what the whips are supposed to be doing.
It's so foolish.
Yeah.
So foolish. But yes, let us know what you make of it all. gbviews@gbnews.com. You've seen the types of messages now that were sent to MPs to lure them in. What do you make of that? Do you think they're just foolish to have responded to that, or perhaps could be victims themselves?
Yes, well, much more coming up. Millions of workers will see a cut in their national insurance rates from tomorrow. But how will it affect you? More on that after the break. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
It's the first time we've had an admission from someone who, at least used to be very senior in the party, saying that this election is not about winning, really, for the Conservatives now. It's about mitigating the losses.
There is broad recognition that this election has already been lost and that it's about damage limitation. And it is really important because it's the difference between whether, if Labour win a slim majority, then the fight is on for the next election. I know it seems silly to look 5 years ahead, but it does make a difference, versus basically accepting that we have 10 years of Labour government ahead.
Having an acknowledgement that the Tories are going to lose and lose badly, disastrously maybe, having that acknowledgement coming from somebody so senior is very demoralising for everybody else in the party, but also doesn't it make it then look rather immoral for them to just drag on right through to maybe November?
Personally, I think Rishi Sunak should name the date now. I think he should name it for October or November.
In terms of reform, if they're only 4 points behind the Conservatives in the latest poll, do we need to stop the narrative, which we have been using legitimately, saying, well, they're doing all right in the polls, but they won't win any seats? Do we need to change that perspective now?
I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on Reform's electoral strategy. There's a lot of evidence that in certain parts of the country with certain demographics, they do have a really good chance. So I think if they target seats in the Red Wall and other places where there's big disillusionment with the Conservatives and what they'd promised, I can't imagine that Reform are at the stage where they could take masses of seats. It's more about that portion of the vote that they'll be taking away that I think is going to result in that massive Labour landslide.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12:23. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, millions of us will see a cut in our national insurance rate from tomorrow, which could help a little bit in easing some financial strain on household budgets, hopefully.
Hopefully. But here's the rub. It's being criticised, with many saying that any cuts will be offset due to inflation. People already being dragged into higher tax brackets than they should be. This was put to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, a little bit earlier.
We've always been very open about the fact that after COVID and the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, we had to put taxes up. But the fundamental divide in British politics is between a Conservative Party, having taken difficult decisions on the economy, is now starting to bring taxes down. 2p off national insurance from Saturday, another 2p off in the autumn statement last year. That came through in January. We want to bring the tax burden down. The Labour Party wants to keep it as it is, and that is the big choice that people will have in the general election this year.
Well, there you go. Jeremy Hunt insisting that there is a big divide between the Conservatives and the Labour Party when it comes to tax. But we want to know how this impacts you out there in Britain. Liam Halligan, GB News economics and business editor, joins us from a Wetherspoons in Guildford. Good stuff. And Jeff Moody, GB News Southwest reporter, is in Barnstaple in Devon. Liam, you're in the Wetherspoons in Guildford. What are people saying there?
I'm indeed. I'm in Wetherspoons on a Friday lunchtime, my natural environment. I've come down here to this commuter town south of London because I was recently with the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt asking him about these national insurance changes. We've had two big tax changes from the Tories in recent months. In January, the Tories lowered the headline rate of national insurance for employees from 12 to 10%, and on Saturday it goes down again from 10 to 8%. Those two changes for the average worker worth something like £800 to £900 a year in saved taxation. That's quite a lot of money. But as you rightly say, and as I quizzed the Chancellor earlier, these tax cuts are more than offset by what we call fiscal drag, by tax thresholds being frozen, the personal allowance at about £12,500, where you start paying the headline rate of income tax and the upper rate of income tax. Lots of middle-income people now, middle-income teachers, police officers, NHS workers, getting dragged into those top tax brackets, and that higher tax that they're paying more than offsets the lower headline rate of national insurance. So the Tories are talking a good game on tax, but the reality is that the tax burden, the share of our income that we pay on tax, continues to rise towards that 70-year high expected next year.
Thank you very much indeed, Liam. Shall we speak to Jeff Moody, who's in Devon? Jeff, what are the people thinking down in Barnstaple?
Well, a lot of people here in Barnstaple didn't know anything about it. I think when we work in news, we think that everybody hangs off our every word, but a lot of people didn't know this was happening. So I was able to spread good cheer amongst the people of Barnstaple today. The news was pretty universally accepted as being great news. People are very pleased at the idea of having a little bit more in their pocket every month. And for some people, on an average or slightly more than average salary, this could be something like an extra £100 a month. And let's face it, we could all do with that at the moment.
It affects everybody. Yeah, I don't know whether it's benefiting the rich as well. Yeah, because they're still up there and we're still down here.
Not for me. I'm in a job where I don't actually earn enough to pay national insurance, and I'm on minimum wage. So from my point of view, no, it makes no difference to me at all.
I'll go by my mum. Like, she thinks that it's actually right, because like, if she's getting more money, then it's like more money for us kids, and she can get more food shopping and everything. And then she's got more money so she can reward herself as well.
Come in tomorrow, which means that by the end of April we should all be a few quid richer. I'm looking forward to that.
Very good indeed. It's interesting to hear what people have to say there, some not even knowing it was coming in, some people on such low wages that they won't feel the impact.
Yes, and of course people feeling like they're being taxed more and more, because to throw back to Liam for a second, we have been taxed more and more. And you said that this doesn't quite make up for that fiscal drag effect. To what degree are we talking? How much worse off are we compared to if there was no fiscal drag at all? And how much better off are we compared to if these tax cuts hadn't happened at all?
Well, it's worth saying that these frozen tax thresholds, Tom, they're introduced in 2022, 2023. They last until 2027, 2028. So those tax holes are frozen between now and then. And every year, as wages go up, as inflation goes up, though hopefully not by as much as it has in the past, more and more people get dragged in those top tax brackets. We're looking at 3 or 4 million extra workers, over a tenth of the workforce, paying tax at a higher rate than they otherwise would have done had those thresholds not been frozen. We're talking about very modestly paid teachers, police officers and NHS workers now paying tax, not at 20%, but at a higher rate of tax. So this more than offsets those lower headline rates of tax. And Jeff Moody's right, of course. A lot of people haven't clocked the fact that this is happening. We only had the first national insurance cut introduced in January, so that's only figured so far in pay packets for February. We've got March pay packets coming out soon, of course, for some people, and then they'll feel the next headline rate of tax reduction from tomorrow. So this will take time. The Tories are hoping that they can get another tax cut in this autumn if they have another fiscal event, and they're hoping that there'll be lower rates of interest too. Just one thing while I'm here with you, Tom and Emily, I would say that even though I do expect interest rates to be cut, there are now signs in financial markets that those rate cuts may take a little bit longer to come through than is otherwise expected. We've been hearing news from the US Federal Reserve that inflation remains very sticky, remains quite high, and also the oil price now just hit $90 a barrel. These are all reasons why there are more price pressures in the pipeline, which may mean that the Bank of England pauses yet again before it lowers interest rates for the first time. I am still expecting the first rate cut to happen in June, but there are some signs in financial markets this morning that that date may once again, unfortunately for those on mortgages, fortunately if you live on your savings, that first interest rate cut may be delayed now beyond June.
Oh, it's giving me flashbacks to when we were all waiting for Freedom Day during COVID, for all those restrictions to go, and they kept pushing it back and pushing it back. Maybe we'll get Mortgage Freedom Day a little bit later. Liam Halligan and indeed Jeff Moody, thank you very much for bringing us all of that.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Well, coming up, I'm waiting and waiting for interest rate cuts, although some people will say they quite like having a bit of interest on their savings for once. But coming up, a union representing civil servants says it is seriously considering taking legal action against the government in relation to the UK's arms sales to Israel. Civil servants could potentially go on strike. We'll have more on that after your headlines with Ray.
Thanks, guys. 12:32, our top stories this hour. Government security experts have been called in to analyse and understand the nature of the WhatsApp messages at the heart of the honey trap sext scandal. So far, around a dozen MPs, staff and journalists have been targeted, but sources told GBNews that more are coming forward today. The Tory MP involved, William Ragg, is expected to be contacted to provide a list of numbers which he handed to the people sending the WhatsApps. Earlier, Ragg told The Times that he'd sent intimate pictures of himself to someone on a gay dating app and was then manipulated into providing those contacts. Millions of people will receive a boost in take-home pay from tomorrow following a cut to employee national insurance. From the start of the new tax year, Class 1 contributions will be reduced from 10 to 8%. Meanwhile, a further 2 million self-employed people will see their Class 4 national insurance reduced from 8 to 6%. Consultants have accepted a pay offer from the government, ending a year-long dispute. The British Medical Association says 83% of members in England voted in favour of the offer, which is an improvement and one rejected earlier on this year. Consultants have taken strike action over the past 12 months, adding to the NHS waiting list, which has also been affected by the junior doctors' dispute, which remains unresolved. Parts of the country have no train services today due to a fresh strike by drivers. ASLEF union members have walked out and mounted picket lines in their long-running dispute over pay. 5 train operators are involved, including Avanti, Cross Country and West Midlands Railway. They say they're not running any services. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, we've just seen Liam. Let's show you the money. The pound will buy you $1.2630 and €1.1657. Price of gold, £1,816.09. And the FTSE 100's 7,896 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Northbound on the M18, there's a lane closure whilst a vehicle has a tyre change from 3 for St Catherine's to Westmoor at junction 4. The A1M is closed in both directions to a lorry fire between Blythe at 34. Delays at a junction 34 for the Blythe interchange. It is very slow southbound as traffic looks across. On the southbound side of the M1, a lane closure and heavy traffic whilst the police deal with an incident from 15 for Northampton to 14 for Milton Keynes. Also on the southbound side of the M1, delays to an earlier accident at junction 11A for Dunstable and Luton North. All lanes have reopened, but delays still remain. As we head to Essex, the northbound side of the M11 partially blocked and slow to an accident between 8A through to junction 9. And that's your very latest on the roads.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
SUV drivers in Oxford will face higher parking charges. Proposals tabled by the local Green Party or passed by the City Council. The motion argues that heavier cars like SUVs cause more damage to roads, are more likely to seriously injure or kill pedestrians, and cause more illnesses due to pollution. However, the Alliance of British Drivers has condemned the plan as absolutely outrageous. Well, let's get the thoughts now of the legendary motoring journalist, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. We hear a lot about the war on motorists, this time targeting SUVs because of their weight, and the charges could be astronomical. This idea first started in Paris. Now it's coming to Oxford. Can you tell us a bit about how it would work?
OK, so the idea is that the charges will penalise people who drive heavier SUVs and I guess by implication electric cars, although Oxford Council haven't said exactly what they're going to do with EVs. But this is all based around this notion of SUVs being heavier than passenger cars, therefore wearing out the roads more. Now, there was a study, I've got it here in front of me, from the University of Edinburgh in 2022 that said real-world tests found that overwhelmingly the wear is caused by large vehicles, buses, heavy good vehicles. Road wear from cars and motorcycles is so low that this is immaterial. Now, obviously, driving around a medieval city like Oxford in an SUV isn't the brightest thing in the world to do. But the idea that we should penalise the owners of these cars based on imperfect science that's been read on social media, I think is completely wrong.
It's 12:38. You're watching, listening to Good Afternoon Britain. You've been getting in touch about this sexting honey trap scandal that is rocking Westminster. Paula says, are these grown men and women seriously falling for this? I and even my 15-year-old go straight to block when we don't know the number. Yes, a lot of us do.
Sensible. Joe says, in an election year, it's obvious that there would be an increase in the number of scams and traps aimed at members of Parliament. The culprits could be hostile states, but my guess is that it's more likely to be left-wing activists. That's what Joe says.
It's a good point, although do we know that Labour MPs have been targeted?
We know Labour figures have been targeted.
Right. So we don't know who exactly, but we may find that out in due course. Peter says, William Ragg was instrumental, as were many others, in getting rid of Boris Johnson, so I have no sympathy, he says. No apologies are relevant, so just resign immediately and perhaps face a police investigation. Well, the police are investigating malicious communications, but that's against the person who was, well, arguably extorting or whatever it is the crime is.
Yes. Joanne says, just because most of us wouldn't do it, these scammers are clever. Look how many get scammed by people who think they love them and part with money. There's even a TV series documentary about it. And, Joanne, that is a very fair point. It's not just MPs who get targeted in this stuff. Yeah. Ordinary members of the public as well face this stuff more and more.
Absolutely. But should you then dish out your colleagues' phone numbers to some random guy off a dating app? I don't think so. I think that's where it goes. You know, he said he has a moment of weakness, weak, vulnerable, whatever. But yes, little element of sympathy there from Joanne. Sue says, as a member of the public, I would never dream of responding to messages like this by sending indecent photos. How did these men think this was a good idea, especially as they were members of government? Yes, we know those MPs who were targeted were male MPs, which may say something about men, not to make this a... well, not to insult men. Lots of men would not do such a thing.
I think men tend to be more rash and perhaps less considered than women on many occasions.
Maybe. Sometimes.
But we do know that over a dozen is what we're hearing, people in Westminster have been targeted by this. And there were two accounts doing it. One purporting to be a man named Charlie and the other purporting to be a woman named Abby. Now, it could be the same person behind both of these accounts, but we just don't know.
So one was targeting gay MPs and one was targeting straight male MPs.
Yes.
Interesting. OK, well, moving on. We'll bring you more as we know it. But elsewhere, civil servants within the Department of Business and Trade involved with arms exports to Israel have raised concerns over their own degree of legal liability if Israel is found to be violating international humanitarian law.
Yes, a union representing the civil servants said it's seriously considering taking legal action in relation to the UK's arms sales to Israel. But does this ride roughshod through civil service impartiality? Let's get more on this now with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, in Westminster for us. Catherine, civil servants are supposed to support government policy, aren't they?
Well, yes, they are. But these ones in particular that work within the Department of Business and Trade are working on arms exports to Israel or other work connected with the Trade Department and Israel. And they are concerned because increasingly it's being questioned whether Israel is still acting within international law over Gaza. There was that judgment by the International Court of Justice back in a few weeks ago that said that Israel could potentially be now committing genocide. We also know that legal advice has been received by the government. We understand David Cameron has had that for a week or two, though the government haven't published it. But basically, these civil servants are saying that they are very worried that they could be working on something effectively which is illegal, because if it is decided that Israel is breaking international law, then they would be complicit. Now, this has been rumbling on actually since January, and the department responded back a few weeks ago in March and said to them, the question of criminal liability for civil servants is very unlikely to arise. Now, I'm not an employment lawyer. I would have thought that any liability would be covered by the Department of Business and Trade, but they clearly aren't satisfied with that. And so they've asked for an urgent meeting, and they are suggesting that they should cease work immediately in the meantime.
This is very interesting, isn't it? Do you get the impression that it is the union and the heads of the union who are mobilising support for this potential walkout, for this potential legal action? Or do you get the impression that there are tens or hundreds of civil servants who are rising up?
We don't know what the numbers are. I would imagine that the numbers, honestly, are fairly small because, for a start, we don't export much in the way of weaponry to Israel. Indeed, Andrew Mitchell, the Foreign Office Minister, said that of all the military hardware imported into Israel, the UK supplies only 0.02%. So not very much, but still obviously important. So I doubt there's many people involved. One thing I would say is, though, that I've gone to many of the national marches for Palestine, the pro-Palestine marches taking place in central London over the last 6 months since those atrocities committed by Hamas on October the 7th. And you see all sorts of different banners and all sorts of different people. But one thing that has struck me is the number of union banners that I've seen. Lots of different unions, from the National Education Union, the RMT, multiple unions there to support the Stop the War marches. So that perhaps might be significant.
Really, really interesting stuff, and pretty damning, really, because civil servants sign up to deliver the policy of the government of the day. We elect the politicians to make the policy. The neutral civil servants should be delivering.
And they're not going to be
policy.
held. They're not going to be held accountable, are they? Personally, the civil servants. If it will be the government who is held accountable if they do something that is wrong or against international law. Catherine, we're going to have to leave it there, but great to speak to you. Thank you for bringing us that important context to this story, political correspondent Catherine Forster. We're going to be talking to a legal expert a little bit later about this. Where does the civil service stand? Can they take a position like this? Some people saying that they should be sacked.
Yes, and frankly, if this were any other issue, surely they would be sacked. If there was someone employed to do a job, employed to deliver the policy of the government of the day, who then decided, actually, I'm not a civil servant, I'm a politician. I'm going to make the policy. Well, no, that's not your job, civil servant. That's not your job.
We've heard a lot of this, haven't we, within the Home Office, people refusing or attempting to refuse to carry out various legislation that they deem beyond the pale. Particularly with regards to the Rwanda scheme and illegal migration. But there you go.
And it's interesting because Britain's always prided itself on a neutral civil service. It means that we can have actually the shortest changeover period in government of any advanced country. If you think about it, you have a general election, the next day you get a new Prime Minister if the party changes. In America, it's, how many months is it? 3 months, 2 months? In many other countries, there's a huge transition time period because they need to employ so many different people rather than just the people at the top. In the UK, the civil service remains the same election to election. And so we can change government quickly. But the question is, if they're not partisan, are they?
Yes, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you think it's on for civil servants to essentially threaten to strike or halt work on anything to do with arming Israel? Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. Perhaps you think this is a matter of conscience. But coming up, the Met Office has warned of danger to life as the UK braces itself for Storm Kathleen. Time to batten up the hatches.
Goodness me. Well, we'll be joined by a Met Office spokesperson after this.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Much of the rain will clear to showers through the rest of the day. We'll start to feel a little bit warmer, but Storm Kathleen will arrive through the night, so it's going to be a warm but very windy weekend. Storm Kathleen is waiting in the wings. This is an area of low pressure slowly starting to fill, and that will start to ease much of the rain we've seen through this morning. So across many southern areas of England and Wales, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers. Across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, they will still see some quite heavy bursts of rain through the rest of the day. It's still quite cold across across the far north of Scotland. But further south, although we've got quite a brisk southerly wind, it is a warm direction. We could see highs of 18 or 19 degrees in the southeast. Well, that's where the best of the sunshine will be. This evening, the next band of rain will arrive into parts of the southwest, and that will push up northwards through the night, and it will bring with it these very strong winds. This is Storm Kathleen to the west of the UK, some very strong gusts. The winds will be particularly strong through the daytime on Saturday, but it will mean we are at a very mild start on Saturday morning, so lows of only 12 or 13 degrees in some places. The rain will push northwards, mainly affecting northwestern areas through the day. Actually, across the east, it should stay largely dry, but there are wind warnings in force for Northern Ireland and many west coasts of Scotland, Wales and England. We can see gusts of 60, possibly 70 miles per hour here, so there could be some travel disruption. But in any of the sheltered sunshine in the east, we could see highs of 22 degrees. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 1. Now, later in the show, an investigation by GB News can reveal that the Home Office has been offering staff trigger support if they read about slavery, as it could remind them of past traumas and give them flashbacks.
Are we even surprised at this point? I mean, trigger warnings for civil servants. These aren't students. These aren't primary school children. These aren't secondary school children. These are civil servants, full adults who have a job to do, and they're being offered trigger warnings because something might mention something to do with slavery one time.
Just because you mentioned... I mean, so were these people personally enslaved? Are there that many people in Britain working for the civil service who were enslaved earlier in their lives? I mean, what?
This is the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, I imagine, where every workplace had to come up with, what do they call it? You basically would have workshops about if you could be impacted by generational trauma, by a trigger somewhere. But I mean, we see this everywhere, don't we? We see this in universities with books, we see this in libraries with books, we see this on TV shows.
Heaven forfend you read the words William Wilberforce and suddenly it all comes back. Well.
But that's
we'll
a scoop. We're going to get to the details. It'll be interesting to find out what exactly these trigger warnings are for.
But moving on, brace yourselves for Storm Kathleen. Yes, the Met Office has issued a danger to life and multiple weather warnings, forecasting heavy rain and, get this, winds of up to 70 miles an hour from today and tomorrow.
That sounds rather fast. Joining us now is Annie Shuttleworth, Met Office presenter and meteorologist. I have to ask you, Annie, when is the rain finally going to stop? It's been miserable for what seems like weeks, if not months.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And although we do have a storm on the way for the weekend, it's actually the wind that's going to be the biggest impact from the storm. For many areas of the UK, it's actually not going to be that wet this weekend. So if you can bear the wind, then it's going to be a dry weekend for the bulk of the UK. Yes, there's going to be some heavy rain, particularly Northern Ireland, northern Scotland in particular. And also the winds are only really going to be strong across the west coast. It's kind of Irish Channel coast that are going to see the strongest winds. There'll likely be disruption to travel through the weekend where we do have those warnings in force, just because the gusts of 70 miles per hour can just put restrictions on bridges, delays to ferries, that sort of thing. But in the east, across Lincolnshire, Norfolk, you could see 22 degrees on Saturday, which would actually be the highest temperature we've had since October. So I think that might be welcome news for some viewers.
So the basic picture, if you're in the east, you're all right. And if you're in the west, it's going to be quite a bit windy, maybe a little rainy. And where should we expect transport to be disrupted?
So the disruption is likely in where we've got those weather warnings for Saturday. So western areas of Wales, southwestern Scotland, northwest England, Northern Ireland in particular. So this storm Kathleen's been named by Met Éireann, which is the Irish Met Service. So it's Western Ireland where they're going to see the strongest gusts. They've got amber warnings there. But for the UK, we've just got yellow weather warnings. So the impacts aren't going to be as big, but we certainly will see some impacts. And those strong winds will also whip up the sea a bit. We've got spring tides this weekend as well. So there's going to be large waves across western coast, so the coast of Ireland, the coast of Scotland as well. So if you're at the coast, if you are going on any ferry journeys as well, I'd definitely check before you travel and make sure you stay safe.
Yes, and take your travel pills if you need them, your travel suites if you get sickness on sea. Thank you very much, Annie Shuttleworth, Met Office presenter and meteorologist. I mean, my umbrella was going inside out on my way here. I had to just give up with it.
Oh, no. Well, you don't look like you've been too drenched, so...
Well, luckily there's a lovely lady who does my hair. Sorts it out when I come in looking like a wet rat.
I don't believe you could ever look like a wet rat. But I wonder, with all these waves, might it be a good weekend for surfing down in Cornwall?
You know what? I did wonder that too. I did wonder. I guess you've got to be a bit safe. You know, you don't want 20-foot waves, do you?
No, there's a balance. There's a delicate balance with all these things. But I think perhaps the lesson here is stay east. But coming up, we're going to bring you the latest on that sexting scandal in Parliament. What's going on? Find out next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Much of the rain will clear to showers through the rest of the day. We'll start to feel a little bit warmer, but Storm Kathleen will arrive through the night, so it's going to be a warm but very windy weekend. Storm Kathleen is waiting in the wings. This is an area of low pressure slowly starting to fill, and that will start to ease much of the rain we've seen through this morning. So across many southern areas of England and Wales, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers. Across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, they will still see some quite heavy bursts of rain through the rest of the day. It's still quite cold across the far north of Scotland, but further south, although we've got quite a brisk southerly wind, it is a warm direction. We could see highs of 18 or 19 degrees in the southeast. Well, that's where the best of the sunshine will be. This evening, the next band of rain will arrive into parts of the southwest, and that will push up northwards through the night, and it will bring with it these very strong winds. This is Storm Kathleen to the west of the UK, some very strong gusts. The winds will be particularly strong through the daytime on Saturday, but it will mean we are at a very mild start on Saturday morning, so lows of only 12 or 13 degrees in some places. The rain will push northwards, mainly affecting northwestern areas through the day. Actually, across the east, it should stay largely dry, but there are wind warnings in force for Northern Ireland and many west coasts of Scotland, Wales and England. You can see gusts of 60, possibly 70 miles per hour here, so there could be some travel disruption. But in any of the sheltered sunshine in the east, we could see highs of 22 degrees. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
The real danger to our democracy, of course, always was China. And we learn overnight. We'd heard in August last year that the Electoral Commission's website had been compromised, their database had been compromised. And we learn overnight that, yes, actually, the Chinese Communist Party now have access to 40 million voters in this country and their data. Well, to respond to this in the House of Commons earlier, we heard from the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden.
I can confirm today that Chinese state-affiliated actors were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns targeting both our democratic institutions and parliamentarians. That is why the United Kingdom has today sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity associated with the Chinese state-affiliated APT-31 group for involvement in malicious cyber activity targeting officials, government entities and parliamentarians around the world.
I don't know how tough that sounds to you in terms of a response, but one Member of Parliament, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, was, shall we say, less than impressed.
Whilst I welcome these 2 sanctions from the government, it is a little bit, this statement, like an elephant giving birth to a mouse. The reality is that in those 3 years, the Chinese have trashed the Sino-British Agreement. They have been committing murder and slave labour and genocide in Xinjiang. We have had churches broken and, in Hong Kong, false court cases against Jimmy Lai.
Great quote, elephant giving birth to a mouse. I rather like that. Sir Ian's here. I'll ask him about where that came from in a moment. But it's all going to be OK. It's all going to be absolutely fine.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 5th of April.
Tory sex trap. Senior Conservative Member of Parliament William Ragg has admitted his involvement in a honey trap sexting scandal targeting over a dozen senior Westminster figures. GB News has exclusive access to messages sent by this honey trap account.
Brexit victory. Britain has been named the 2nd most powerful country in the world by the Global Soft Power Index. Has Brexit Britain actually exceeded expectations? Is the great still in Britain? We'll be hosting a fiery debate.
And Britain off the rails. Train drivers at 16 companies stage a fresh wave of strikes today in an ongoing dispute over pay. We'll bring you the latest from Manchester Piccadilly.
Is Britain great? Is Britain still great?
Britain is great. The question is, for me, is it the 2nd most powerful country? The Conservative Party yesterday put out a communication saying Britain, the second most powerful country. Of course, the index is about soft power. So China doesn't have a lot of soft power, really. It's got hard power, but not soft power. Britain, perhaps it's the opposite. We don't have a lot of hard power anymore. But the brand of Britain, is it well received around the world? Because that's what this survey is saying.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because they say that actually since leaving the European Union, because we've become closer to the United States as a result, that's boosted us up the charts.
Of course, number 1 is the United States.
Yes.
They're the hegemonic power of the world. They have been since we handed over the baton after the Second World War. I mean, I'd have preferred, perhaps, to remain the greatest superpower in the world, but you know, sometimes we have to let these things move on.
But do you think the country is still great? Do you think we have this influence over the rest of the world? Is global Britain working? That's what lots of Brexiteers promised, that we would be a global country without the shackles of the European Union holding us back. Let us know what you think. We're going to be having this debate, whether we are still great as a country.
Yeah, but of course your views, gbviews at gbnews.com, that's the address to email in. We'll get to all of that after your headlines with Ray.
Good afternoon. 2 minutes past one, our top stories. Government security experts have been called in to analyse the WhatsApp messages at the heart of the Westminster sext scandal. So far, around a dozen MPs, staff and journalists are known to have been targeted, and sources have told GB News that more are coming forward. That's after Tory MP William Ragg told The Times that he'd sent intimate pictures of himself to someone on a gay dating app and was then manipulated into providing the contacts. He's expected to be contacted today and will be asked for the list of numbers which he shared. The Met Police has also confirmed that it's working with other forces over blackmail concerns. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says everyone needs to take cybersecurity seriously.
Well, I think the events of the last few days have been a great cause for concern. The MP involved has given a courageous and fulsome apology, but the lesson here for all MPs is that they need to be very careful about cybersecurity, and indeed it's the lesson for members of the public as well, because this is something that we are all having to face in our daily lives.
Millions of people will receive a boost in take-home pay from tomorrow following a cut to employee national insurance. From the start of the new tax year, Class 1 contributions will be reduced from 10 to 8%. Meanwhile, a further 2 million self-employed people will see their Class 4 national insurance reduced from 8 to 6%. The government says around 29 million workers will benefit from these changes. Shadow Chancellor, however, Rachel Reeves, says taxes are actually going up.
While they say tomorrow that taxes are going down, all of the numbers show that taxes are on the rise. Taxes today are at a 70-year high, and they're due to increase in every single year of the forecast period. In fact, by the end of the forecast, the average British family would be paying £870 more in tax because of the frozen national insurance and income tax threshold, and because of increases in council tax too. That is the Conservatives' double whammy on tax.
ASLEF has accused the government of being economically incompetent as train drivers continue their strikes over pay. Union members have walked out and mounted picket lines across the country. Some areas have no train services today, with 5 train operators, including Avanti, Cross Country and West Midlands Railway, not running any services. A ban on overtime at 16 companies is also continuing into tomorrow. Mick Whelan says workers want a resolution.
We actually want somebody to come to the table and resolve this issue. The people behind me haven't had a pay rise for 5 years, half a decade. In the cost of living crisis, we're the same as any other worker. Regardless of what you earn, you feel that you have a right to demand a pay rise when you've got an economically incompetent government.
Consultants have accepted a pay offer from the government, ending a year-long dispute. The British Medical Association says 83% of members in England voted in favour of the offer, which is an improvement on one rejected earlier on this year. Consultants have taken strike action over the past 12 months, adding to the NHS waiting list, which has also been affected by the junior doctors' dispute, which remains unresolved. New powers to prevent disruptive protests come into force today, with offenders facing up to 6 months in prison or an unlimited fine. Serious disruption prevention orders can now be used to stop repeat offenders from joining protest groups in particular areas and at particular times. Home Secretary James Cleverly says the powers target those who are, quote, dedicated to wreaking havoc. However, civil liberties organisation Liberty has described it as a shameless attempt to prevent people from being able to make their voices heard. The Israeli military has dismissed 2 officers over the drone strikes which killed 7 aid workers, including 3 Brits. In a phone call with Israel's Prime Minister, US President Joe Biden said future support for the country depends on the steps taken to protect civilians and aid workers. Israel has since announced it's opening new routes for humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza, with the Erez crossing being opened for the first time since last October. Officials also say they're planning to increase the amount of aid from Jordan moving through the Kerem Shalom crossing. The King has reportedly told aides to ramp up plans for a 2-week state visit to Australia. King Charles is said to be over the moon and raring to go after his cancer treatment started positively. The 75-year-old is said to be feeling optimistic after he was able to meet with the public on Easter Sunday. He's reportedly told aides that he is supercharging plans to also visit New Zealand and Samoa. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts. You can scan the QR code, it's on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, straight back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, following senior figures in Westminster finding their mobile phone numbers shared and unsolicited flirtatious messages sent to their personal phones, GB News has today been given exclusive access to the Westminster honeypot messages. Let's have a look at how the honey trap worked. A message would be sent pretending to have known the recipient. In this instance, an account identifying itself as Charlie was sad not to bump into you over conference season, it said. It's been too long. This was followed up by the flirtatious message, do I need to do something better to grab your attention? Well, GB News understands messages were sent over a period spanning 5 months. Here we see persistent messages. Oh, hey, how are you? Sorry, accident. Hey, we not going to pick this up then? We understand that well over a dozen figures in Westminster have been targeted in this way.
Curious. Well, let's discuss this further with GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Christopher, thank you very much. We've just seen examples of some of these messages that were sent to politicians and other key figures in Westminster. What's the latest in terms of political reaction? The Conservative Party is standing by William Ragg MP for now.
Yeah, we heard from Jeremy Hunt there, the Chancellor, making clear that the party is supporting William Ragg, who has had mental health issues in the past. He will not be losing the Tory whip. The Labour Party is maybe less sympathetic. Let's have a listen to what Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, had to say.
Incredibly concerning, the revelations that we've heard overnight. The police are now looking into this. That is right, and the police investigation should be able to take its course.
But what do you want to see happen to Ragg? Should he resign?
Well, that's a question for the Conservatives. The police investigation is now underway, and it is right that we allow that investigation to take its course.
I get you don't want to talk about Will Ragg specifically, but how concerned are you in general about the vulnerability of MPs to blackmail?
Well, I'm very concerned about what seems to have happened in this incident, especially about MPs' telephone numbers being passed on to unknown sources. That is really concerning, and that is right that there is a proper investigation into this. In positions of responsibility, we always have to think about our actions, but there are also malevolent players out there who are trying to influence politics in these benign ways.
Rachel Reeves there speaking to reporters up in Blackpool. I can say that this hour we're learning that the Met Police, a second police force, is now investigating this honey trap scandal. We know that Leicestershire Police is already investigating, but Met Police have put out a statement already saying that we are in contact this morning with the colleagues in the Parliamentary Security Police and with Leicestershire Police following reporting of these unsolicited messages to members of Parliament. We will assess any reports made to us accordingly. So now there are 2 police forces investigating this evolving scandal. I can tell you also that last night the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, wrote to MPs and staff to say that they have now got a government security expert examining these messages. They're trying to understand the nature of them. They don't want to speculate about the origin. Some would say there's a risk there could be some foreign nefarious actors involved, some countries trying to isolate and go after MPs who could give out numbers in the case of William Ragg. Common sources tell me this morning that it looks unlikely it was a foreign actor, but they're not sure, so they're checking it all out now. And as we speak, more names are coming forward. It's an evolving situation here in Westminster.
An evolving situation and a concerning situation, not least for members of Parliament, for national security and for, I suppose, security on online as well. This is something that, of course, is not particularly new in the world of politics. Over decades, in previous centuries, we've seen blackmail attempts at members of Parliament, some from people looking to make money, some part of organised crime, some from foreign actors, and there are other examples as well. We don't have any leads in terms of which one of these it is in this instance.
No, we don't, Tom. But you read out there our GBNews exclusive. The nature of those messages were very kind of teasing, weren't they? They were trying just to indicate to the person who sent those messages, will you send me something back? What do you want to see from me? And it's clearly they would have gone out to lots of different MPs and members of staff to see who might respond. And as we know, some two MPs did respond with pictures of themselves. That's what the Times are reporting. Again, going back to what William Ragg told the Times, he said that they had compromising things on me. They wouldn't leave me alone. I've hurt people by being weak. I was scared. And I think that's where the government comes from this morning. They recognise there's a vulnerable man here being targeted by people trying to draw things out from him. And he's on his own, maybe, looking at his phone, getting worried. You know, he's a gay man, maybe. I mean, he responded in a way which he deeply regrets. And I think that's what the government is seeing and putting their arm around him this morning. Yes, I guess some people will see this as him putting his colleagues in a vulnerable position too. But thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, GB News political editor there. I mean, those messages, they're so simplistic. And can't help, we've had so many people writing in saying, when I receive an unknown number, well, a message from an unknown number, I just, you know, block. I mean, the most someone might say is, who's this? And then you get a weird response and you just, that's
block,
it.
Delete, archive, ignore. But let's get the thoughts now of former Labour MP Bill Rammell. Bill, this is a concerning and evolving story engulfing Westminster. When you were an MP, indeed when you were a minister, did you ever receive texts or attempted contacts from unknown or suspicious people?
No, but I'm of that generation. I barely knew how to use my telephone or text. But, you know, overall, I've actually got a strong degree of sympathy for William Ragg, and indeed any MP who's not married or not in a long-term relationship, because you question when you're starting a relationship, is the person interested in me, or are they interested in me because I'm an MP? You know, I was elected in the Blair landslide in 1997. A lot of young MPs coming into the House of Commons, and I remember talking to both men and women who felt that pressure. So I think it is a difficult situation. So I've got sympathy for William Ragg. He was clearly being blackmailed. You know, I think he's been foolish. He's made an error of judgment. In his own words, he's been weak. But, you know, I think that's what's happened.
Yeah, but what does it say about our MPs if, you know, about a dozen have responded to these types of messages, with some MPs sending indecent photos and all this? And William Ragg himself, what was his answer to feeling under pressure and feeling blackmailed? Clearly it wasn't good to go to the police first. It was to try and find a way to get out of it by passing on phone numbers of his colleagues. It doesn't look good, does it, Bill?
Well, no, it doesn't. But I mean, you know, I think if there is a lesson, it's don't send incriminating photographs of yourself to anybody else. Now, again, I'm of that generation. I can't get my head around why people do that, but I choose my words carefully. Clearly, amongst a younger generation, it's quite a commonplace practice. However, if you are an MP, you must not do it, because it's going to come back to bite you.
Surely they get training for that. Surely the parliamentary party says, whatever you do, don't send naked pictures to unknown people on a dating app. I mean, surely. And if they don't, then they should.
Well, I don't know is the answer. I would imagine that there is advice and guidance to MPs about phishing, about unsolicited telephone and email contacts. But I think it is probably time. And, you know, we've had this instance, we've had recent instances of MPs being targeted for cyber hacking by foreign governments. I think it's probably timely to review the advice and guidance to give MPs the best advice and support that they can have in these circumstances.
It's quite
But,
hard
it's
to
almost
deliver this guidance, though, isn't it, Bill? Because MPs aren't employees of a sort of parliamentary structure. They're all independently elected, and if something is offered to them, they can say no, and perhaps some MPs might arrogantly just turn it all down.
Sure, it's something that's generally not understood. You are accountable to nobody as a member of parliament apart from your constituents, and that accountability takes place once every 4 or 5 years. But if the advice and guidance is there, I would imagine most MPs would avail themselves of that. But I'm almost reluctant to give this bit of advice. But I actually think the advice to MPs is just be careful in your engagements with members of the public that you don't know. And yet part of me doesn't want to give that advice, because you want MPs, our elected representatives, to be open, to be engaging, to be communicating with people. But we live in a world with technology, with social media and all the rest of it.
This is a bit different though, Bill, isn't it? This is a bit different. I mean, an unknown number gets in touch with you with flirty messages, it escalates, and then you end up sending an indecent pic. It's not exactly like, it's not the same as ignoring a constituent in the local Waitrose, is it? And being suspicious of her. This is pretty seedy stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is different, and the vast majority of MPs would reject those solicitations. But if you are young, if you are single, if you're looking for relationships, then you might respond, and that's clearly what's happened. It shouldn't happen, and you need to take care. And I certainly think you need to think once, think twice, think 100 times before you send any pictures of yourself. And bluntly, you shouldn't do it.
I think there's a big lesson for everyone, which is if you're looking for love, perhaps anonymous phone numbers, people that you've never met in real life, maybe that's not true love.
You're making me laugh, and it's inappropriate for me to laugh at this point. But yes, thank you, Bill. Bill Rammell there, former Labour politician, MP, fantastic stuff. Yes, I can see the element of sympathy that one might have towards William Bragg.
Well, the thing is,
as a single, relatively young man,
if he hadn't moved on all of these numbers, there would be there would be no ambiguity about this. He's a victim here. But then, of course, the questions that the Labour Party are asking around this, because these numbers have been passed on. Although I have to say, the number of people who have the numbers of politicians, I think if you're a politician, you should probably expect that every news organisation has your number, probably a great deal of numbers of your parliamentary, your constituency association probably all have your number. Your number will have got around, and lots of people will have it.
I think it's a moot point. You don't expect your colleague to send it out, though.
No, of course not. Of course not.
And that's where and then
you
they
should be suspicious if you get a random text.
You should, absolutely. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. But coming up, has Brexit Britain actually exceeded expectations? Is the great still in Britain? We're hosting a fiery debate in the next few minutes.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. You're very vexed about these China cyber attacks. Colin says, what the hell is our Secret Service doing? They've only just realised what China's up to. You just couldn't make it up.
We could have told you.
We knew. We're not surprised. So Colin, we agree with you. Quite why it's taken GCHQ or MI6 or whoever it is, MI5. It'd be MI5 to know what's going on.
And Rod has said, thank you, Rod, if you know how you vote, if they know how you vote, coupled with mass data held also on you, do you not believe they can influence your decision-making process in any way? They won't know.
I'm not sure they know how you vote, because that's
not on record anyway, is it?
It is not.
And Ken says these are only able to be carried out because of computers, internet, mobile phones, etc. It seems to me that these inventions are ruining our lives, and therefore we were much safer and much happier without these inventions. There is a school of thought that would agree with that, Ken, very much so.
I sort of often think it myself, really.
Me too.
The dark web. I mean, how many people have been murdered because of the dark web?
You do wonder as well.
Brianna Jai.
Yeah, you do wonder. I look at my kids' generation and I wonder whether they will grow up and have a complete rejection of all of this and they will just say enough, because they will think we were all insane for having become so addicted to our phones. I wonder whether, as a generation after generation do, they will reject it. Wayne, blame Western governments for the rise of China. People were saying this 10 years ago and every country ignored it. That is a really good point, Wayne, because we've taken Chinese investment and obviously our houses are full of items we've bought from made in China.
And if you remember as well, we had to get them out of the 5G. Huawei.
We did.
Get them out, literally extricate them
Yeah,
from
that
us.
was at least one thing I think they did quite well.
Yeah.
And Jan says if they've seen the electoral roll, what else have they been looking at? That's the threat to our democracy. They never do things by halves. I'm much more worried about my own government looking at what I do online, to be fair.
The point is, though, go back, we said before, the electoral roll is a public document which you can access if you go to your library.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Right, is Britain still great? Is Britain still great? Andy says, everyone is on strike. Our infrastructure is broken. We are 2.5 trillion in debt. We have a government who don't govern. Where's the exit? I want to leave. All right, Andy.
Well, Wanda says, rule Britannia. Yes, the UK is the best, the fairest country in the world. Better without the EU. We are the envy of the world. That's what Wanda thinks.
Oh, Wanda, you are in a fantastic mood this afternoon. I like you. Sandra says, if Britain is great now, well, God help us. Yes, there's quite a lot of emails coming in about how we're in decline.
Well, Tim agrees. He says we're deluded if we think we're great. We're not even British anymore, says Tim. I'm not quite sure is that.
Well, we're losing a lot of patriotism, that's for sure. Jan says, no, we're a laughing stock. Soft yes. And too eager to try to appease everyone but our own people.
And Paul has tried to ruin all of the fun, which I quite love in his pedantic way. He says that the great in Great Britain is not about how great we are, but refers to size. It's historic and distinguishes Great Britain from Brittany, which is a smaller landmass.
That's the sort of point that Tom would make on a bad day, wouldn't it? It would, and I'd sit here going, all right, all right, all right.
Although at least Paul was pithy about it.
He was pithy. He was pithy. So is Britain still great? Let's see what our feisty duo think. Joining us now is leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, who thinks Britain is still great, and the writer and broadcaster Anna May Mangan, who thinks it isn't too great at the moment anyway. Neil, go on. What's your pitch? Why is Britain still great?
Well, it is great, but it could be a lot greater. Of course, you know, we are one of the most significant countries, economies in the world, and the doom mongers of Project Fear have been completely confounded by the progress that we've made since Brexit. Of course, we could have made a lot more progress if we had a government that actually believed in it. And if we pared back the unnecessary regulation and legislation that was imposed upon us whilst we were members of it, but which this government has done next to nothing to reverse. The tax and regulatory burden on business in this country is a major ball and chain around its legs and neck. And of course, Britain would be a far better place to live if we got rid of the corpus of the PC legislation on diversity and inclusivity and all that nonsense that businesses have to have HR departments pushing through at vast expense and getting in the way of business.
Despite all that.
But despite all that, Neil, you are saying that Britain's great.
Yeah, well, we're still the 6th or 7th largest economy in the world. We have a very high standard of living compared with other countries. And if you look at the progress in Europe in the last 8 years, we are doing a lot better than Germany or France, for example.
We're doing better than Europe, Anna. Let's put that to Anna. Neil, let's put that to Anna. We're still great. We're doing better than Europe.
Yeah, all this talk about the global stage, the national stage, really, you have to look at life for the people living in a country to assess just how good or bad it is. Let's keep the EU, keep it all out of it. Let me start with today. I decided I needed a doctor's appointment first thing this morning. No chance, not even in 3 or 4 weeks, just nothing. You have to scramble for one every day, and then you never get one. So I decided to drive to the chemist, but my car bounced up and down in all the potholes that are in my road. I came back and chatted to my neighbour, who's now caring for her elderly father because there was no social care provision for him, even though he's worked all his life and paid all his taxes. Now he's left just chucked on the scrap heap now that he's in his 80s and can't look after himself. It's just absolutely everything is broken. Ofsted is in a state of collapse. Our political class has never been worse. I'm a woman, a 66-year-old woman. I've been squizzed out of my pension because the government couldn't be bothered to write me a letter. I know that's historical, but fixing it, just like for the post office victims, that's not happening. And I'm not even allowed to say that I'm a woman.
Anna, you've had a quintessentially broken Britain day, really, haven't you? Everything's gone wrong.
But hang on. But Anna, are you saying that we should listen to? Are you saying that we should ignore Brand Finance and their 2024 Global Soft Power Index, which of course put Britain as number 2?
They're not affected by the train strike today. They're getting ferried to and fro in chauffeur-driven cars, paid for by somebody else. The realities of it is that we're paying ridiculous taxes for no services. We don't value our doctors. They're overworked and underpaid. We don't value our teachers. They're overworked and underpaid. And the government, we've got a leader who is as weak as putty. And by the way, he wasn't elected. So everything's got to change. I'm patriotic. I want this country to be wonderful, and I'm glad I'm British, but it needs a lot of change.
Well, let's throw that back to Neil.
Well, I entirely agree. The political class in Britain is what's holding the British people back. Anna's absolutely right. All the things she was complaining about are all things that are run by the British state. And the National Health Service is the only health service in the world that's modelled on what the Soviet Union used to have. It's no wonder it's failing. I've had similar problems in the last week. In fact, yesterday, trying to book hospital appointments and get to see the GP, etc., etc. We know that the NHS, although it's funded around the median level of health services around the world, has much, much worse outcomes on cancer and all sorts of things. And trying to get a GP appointment, as you absolutely say, is almost impossible these days.
Neil,
so
can we please have some optimism?
Yeah, come on, we want some optimism from you, Neil.
I'm disappointed.
But that's not to undermine what I said to start with. That Britain is still one of the greatest countries in the world. I think the greatest. And, we have contributed so much to what is good in the world and are still doing so. We could do a lot better. Yes, I entirely agree. And if we had a government that was capable of doing it, nobody would be better pleased than I. But, what's the difference between the Conservatives and Labour? You could hardly put a cigarette paper between them, really, on all the major issues. What we do need to do is get rid of the current political class and put people like Anna and me in charge of things. Then I think we'll be a lot better.
Yeah,
that would be
I'll be the boss, Neil. You can be my deputy.
Well, I mean, what a proposal there. Anna, are you willing to accept, therefore, that Neil's proposition that perhaps Britain, whilst it has some problems right now, is like a coiled spring, best placed in the world to sort of spring forth and reveal its inert greatness?
I think the people of Britain are fantastic. I think they're tolerant. I think they're patient. But it's seriously running out now. I'm a Londoner. I want to cross London to visit my son on a Saturday afternoon. I can't go because there's a load of maniacs spouting anti-Semitic hate when I try and go down Park Lane. I've got the right to move around my own city. Sadiq Khan has taxed me so much that I can't drive to see my son and I can't get on the trains because they're currently playing the strike. What is going wrong? Somebody needs to say, think about the people instead of the money, instead of the businesses. They need to treat us as though we have rights, and we need to vote in such a way. I mean, I'm actually a floating voter, and Neil says, what's the difference between Labour and the Tories? Probably 14 years of mismanagement and corruption. At the moment, that's the difference, but who knows what's coming down the line.
You're not happy with Sweet Cards London either.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike the Labour governments under Tony Blair, which of course were pure as the driven snow. No, I think.
Well, let's talk about now. You could send your child to a decent school when Tony Blair was in charge. And I'm not a Labour voter, but I could see the difference in the improvements that he made. Whereas now, in my area, the schools are, I mean, I don't know what I do. My four are educated now. I don't know what I do if those choices were now. So everything has slid, and there's no doubt about it.
Well, Neil and Anna, I'm afraid we have run to the end of this segment just as you were getting going. But my goodness, thank you so much for both coming on and putting forward your views. Really appreciate it.
I agree with a lot of what both of them said there.
This was meant to be an uplifting segment.
I know.
I feel more miserable than ever.
Well, you know what? We'll come back from the break and we'll deliver our verdict on Great Britain and what makes it great. So get your emails in because I want to read some of them. But we've got a GB News exclusive coming up because a minister is issuing a warning over Palestine Action joining forces with Just Stop Oil, their youth movement, for a so-called resistance campaign. Enough to ground London to a halt again? Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester? Stay tuned.
Coming up to 1:34, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories. Government security experts have been called in to analyse WhatsApp messages at the heart of the Westminster sext scandal. So far, around a dozen MPs, staff and journalists are known to have been targeted, and sources have told GB News that more are coming forward. It's after Tory MP William Ragg told The Times that he'd sent intimate pictures of himself to someone on a gay dating app and was then manipulated into providing the contacts. He's expected to be contacted today and will be asked for the list of numbers which he shared. The Met Police has also confirmed that it's working with other forces over blackmail concerns. Millions of people will receive a boost in take-home pay from tomorrow following a cut to employee national insurance. From the start of the new tax year, Class 1 contributions will be reduced from 10 to 8%. Meanwhile, a further 2 million self-employed people will see their Class 4 national insurance reduced from 8 to 6%. Consultants have accepted a pay offer from the government ending a year-long dispute. The British Medical Association says 83% of its members in England voted in favour of the offer, which is an improvement on one rejected earlier on this year. Consultants have been striking over the past 12 months, adding to the NHS waiting list, which has also been affected by the junior doctors dispute, which remains unresolved. Well, parts of the country have no train services today due to a fresh strike by drivers, as left union members have walked out and mounted picket lines in their long-running dispute over pay. 5 train operators, including Avanti, Cross Country and West Midlands Railway, say they're not running any services. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
OK, let's take a look at the financial markets. The pound will buy you $1.2643 and €1.1659. Price of gold, £1,813.68. That's per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,900 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Much of the rain will clear to showers through the rest of the day. We'll start to feel a little bit warmer, but Storm Kathleen will arrive through the night, so it's going to be a warm but very windy weekend. Storm Kathleen is waiting in the wings. This is an area of low pressure slowly starting to fill, and that will start to ease much of the rain we've seen through this morning. So across many southern areas of England and Wales, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers. Across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, they will still see some quite heavy bursts of rain through the rest of the day. It's still quite cold across the far north of Scotland. But further south, although we've got quite a brisk southerly wind, it is a warm direction. We could see highs of 18 or 19 degrees in the southeast. Well, that's where the best of the sunshine will be. This evening, the next band of rain will arrive into parts of the southwest, and that will push up northwards through the night, and it will bring with it these very strong winds. This is Storm Kathleen to the west of the UK. Some very strong gusts. The winds will be particularly strong through the daytime on Saturday, but it will mean we are at a very mild start on Saturday morning, so lows of only 12 or 13 degrees in some places. The rain will push northwards, mainly affecting northwestern areas through the day. Actually, across the east, it should stay largely dry, but there are wind warnings in force for Northern Ireland and many west coasts of Scotland, Wales and England. You can see gusts of 60, possibly 70 miles per hour here, so there could be some travel disruption. But in any of the sheltered sunshine in the east, we could see highs of 22 degrees. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Jules Buckley, southbound M9, Old Phillipston down to Kirkliston, junction 2 to 1A. The outside lanes combed off. There's flooding there and is causing congestion this morning. Westbound M62, the traffic's being held Castleford towards Rothwell, 31 to 30 westbound. It's for emergency repairs. That's naturally causing delays as well. The anti-clock M60 at 14, the East Lancs Road turn off 2 lanes out in queues, a breakdown causing congestion. Still slow on the M25 clockwise just after the M4 turn off at 15. The earlier breakdown's gone, but still heavy back towards Staines at junction 13. And in Somerset, the northbound M5 is part blocked. Western Supermare 21 up to junction 20 at Clevedon. Slow going there. It's at the scene of a collision. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
It's 1:39 now. Could a new activist group bring fresh disruption to our streets this spring? Policing Minister Chris Philp has issued a warning after GB News revealed that a Just Stop Oil youth movement has joined forces with the controversial activist group Palestine Action for a so-called resistance campaign.
Yes, there's nothing more pro-climate than launching rockets with Hamas. I'm sure they wouldn't endorse that, but sometimes those two things are similar. Together, they're calling for an end to oil and gas licences and an embargo on arms deals with Israel. Right, Youth Demand is planning marches and an unspecified action next week. Well, our reporter Charlie Peters has the story.
New environmental group Youth Demand is advertising upcoming marches and activities in collaboration with Palestine Action. The group started as Just Stop Oil students and is asking volunteers if they are willing to risk arrest. I met with Chiara Sarti, an organiser with the group.
We're a new campaign that is demanding that the Tories and the Labour Party commit to stopping all Tory oil and they stop selling weapons with Israel and buying weapons from Israel.
But you're also saying that they're driving another genocide by virtue of links with oil and gas.
They're allowing these fossil fuel projects to go through. When that carbon gets put in the air, it will result in the deaths of millions of people.
Why do you think that the pro-Palestine and environmental causes are linked?
If you look closely, it is the same broken political system that is driving genocide on both fronts. The Tories and Labour are driving these policies that are going to kill millions of people. They basically place no value whatsoever on human life. And we can clearly see this in Gaza. I think this clearly goes to show just how little value they place on human life, how cheap Palestinian blood is to those people.
We've also seen some
slightly stronger protests and such as shutting down factories. And what do you make of that sort of behaviour, particularly shutting down factories associated with the Elbit system?
Yeah, we absolutely need to do everything we non-violently can to sever the links between the UK and the Israeli war machine. Absolutely.
And that includes smashing up factories, blocking sewers, breaking windows. You support all of that action?
I think we need to emotionally connect with what is happening here. 12,000 kids have been brutally murdered. I think if that's not going to get you on the streets, you basically have no values whatsoever. The next 1,000 generations are going to spit on your grave.
Right, well, Charlie Peters can join us now. Charlie, it sounds a little bit menacing to me, these two groups conjoining.
Well, Lord Vorney, the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption, has called this new link an unholy alliance, saying that militant Gaza protesters are now linking with environmentalists. But the strongest concern we've heard has come from the policing minister, Chris Philp, who has told us that criminality has no place on our streets, and that includes so-called protesters causing criminal damage and serious disruption to threaten and intimidate the law-abiding majority. We will not stand for Just Stop Oil, Palestine Action or any other group considering combining forces and crossing the line. We have given police powers to tackle criminal actors, whatever their guise, and will go further to ensure officers have the tools they need to prevent serious disruption and disorder. He goes on to say that the police continue to closely monitor and prepare for any protests that could see criminality, and we are confident officers will do all they can to stop any groups who break the law. Now, Chris Philp has made that statement as new powers come in today for the police, which includes a serious disruption prevention order with a maximum jail penalty of 6 months for those found guilty. It's been added on to the Public Order Act from last year. Now, this new alignment, these two groups, Just Stop Oil Youth Movement and Palestine Action, are set to collaborate in action in central London on Wednesday. And when I spoke to the new organisation and discussed these new links, they weren't able to tell me what sort of action might take place, but they did say they anticipated hundreds to be there and engaging in that protest. Now, while you've just heard that Just Stop Oil and Youth Demand are engaged in non-violent protests, and that's the perspective that they hold, you also heard that spokesperson defending slightly more direct and violent incidents of protesting vandalism, such as smashing windows and smashing up factories. And that has been one of the tactics of the group that they are collaborating with, that is Palestine Action. And so there is this concern now that next week's protests could see an escalation in their activity from just marching in the streets or preventing cars from passing over roads or blocking bridges into something more violent and more direct. It is really quite concerning. But Charlie, have these two groups simply said the quiet part out loud? That really these aren't different groups at all. There's a certain kind of professional protester who goes out to make trouble and break the law, and it doesn't matter what guise they pretend they're under, whether it's Just Stop Oil, Palestine Action, or whatever is fashionable this week to the next. These are the same people, and they'll do the same thing. Well, in our investigation into this new group, we have found several overlapping members of both organisations, of the organisations involved in these protests generally, I should say. In particular, we found that the co-founder of Palestine Action was a leading member of Extinction Rebellion, a different group, of course, among environmentalist protesters. So there does appear to be an overlap of personnel among the causes. We have heard from critics saying that these are often causes of the left more generally, and so you do find similar personalities in both groups. Other criticism has pointed to the fact that there isn't necessarily a direct link between both missions. The activists from Youth Demand are describing a genocide in the access of new oil and gas licences from
from the Conservative Party, but they're also accusing the Labour Party of being complicit in a genocide in Gaza. So extremely strong language in their protests, but we'll have to wait and see next week if that protest will escalate and if we'll see more environmentalist and pro-Palestinian alignment.
Yes, we will indeed. And I read that Kiara Sati, the young woman you spoke to, has spent time in prison before for something relating to a Just Stop Oil march in London. But thank you very much indeed, Charlie Peters there. Youth Demand has told us in a statement, Chris Philp is right, that criminality has no place on our streets, but it also should have no place in the corridors of power. Sadly, that is not the case at the moment.
They continue. People of all political persuasions are seeing that politics is failing us. Wow. And that our leaders are more interested in enriching themselves rather than protecting ordinary people. Young people are not content to have criminals running the country. Palestine Action are yet to get back to us, we should add.
Well, coming up, we're live at Manchester Piccadilly because train drivers at 16 rail companies have today begun a fresh wave of strikes. Good luck with your commute.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
It's a remarkable story, isn't it?
Amazing.
Extraordinary. And also, she was unflappable, apparently, the Princess Royal.
She's
just
brilliant.
refused to get out of the car and said, I'm not going anywhere. Extraordinary. Well, Jim Beaton was awarded the George Cross for protecting the Princess and delighted to say joins us now, along with the former head of Royalty Protection, Di Davis. Jim, you won't remember, but I met you some time ago at the Imperial War Museum when Princess Anne was opening an exhibition to do with the George Cross, and you were there reunited with her. And you told me then what great admiration you had for the Princess, cool under fire, but you didn't do so badly yourself.
It was probably my job. And also, I had a wee bit of police training, not very much, but a little bit, whereas Princess Anne had nothing. And yet, the way she displayed it, you would have thought she'd been highly trained to deal with any type of that situation.
Even though you'd had some training, you took 3 bullets for the Princess. You effectively stood between her and a deranged gunman.
Well, I was supposed to be a protection officer, really, so I just tried to fuddle about. You must remember that back in 1974, there was no communication, and we were extremely lucky that Michael Hills, who was outside Clarence House and nearby, had got one of the fast police radios, or radios on his shoulder, so he was able to send a message out. Otherwise, we would have just been relying on the good old public to phone in and say there was something happening.
Yeah.
So times have changed drastically.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 10 to 2. Now, train drivers at 16 rail companies have today begun a fresh wave of strikes in their seemingly never-ending dispute over pay.
Yes, members of the ASLEF union are striking from today until April the 8th, and commuters have been advised not to travel in the meantime.
Well, let's go live to Manchester Piccadilly now and speak to GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, how much disruption is there?
Well, I can tell you for free that if you are in Manchester today and you're planning on travelling down to Birmingham or London, say, you may well be in for a rude awakening, because those 5 train companies who are on strike today, so Avanti, West Coast, East Midlands Railway, West Midlands Trains, London North Western Railway and Cross Country, all 5 of those companies are on complete strike today, so there are absolutely no services whatsoever. So if people are planning on travelling from here in Manchester Piccadilly down to, say, Birmingham New Street or London Euston, that essentially will not be possible. Now, we're entering the 20th month of these rail strikes. Many people starting to show the frustrations as train drivers ask for better pay and better working conditions. We've been asking people here at Manchester Piccadilly today what they make of these strikes as we enter that 20th month, and this is what they had to tell me. What are your thoughts on them? Do you think we just need to get a deal now sorted out, or...?
We've got to get something sorted. It's gone on for over 18 months now. Trains missing today, trains missing tomorrow. And then you've got the usual bits and pieces of trains delayed, trains cancellations. It's harder to get to work when using public transport.
I do think this should be over by now. I've been affected quite a lot by them. So yeah, I think it's been going on for too long.
So you don't think drivers should be going for a better pay?
I think, well, they could be, but I think there could be a better way of dealing with it rather than the continuous strikes.
I support them getting a better pay. I mean, at the end of the day, the transport infrastructure in this country is in decline, particularly in the north, for a long, long time now. So, you know, the guys are being asked to work longer shifts, work a lot harder for us. So, I completely support them.
I think there's a really overwhelming sense of passenger frustration. They just want it sorted out one way or another. Now, ASLEV's General Secretary Mick Whelan has commented on this, saying those votes show yet again a clear rejection by train drivers of the ridiculous offer put to us in April last year by the Rail Delivery Group. Now, that ridiculous offer that he refers to there is an 8% pay rise, which the Department of Transport says would see the average train driver's salary increase from £60,000 to £65,000. But of course, it's not just about pay, it's also about working conditions. But the issue remains that if they can't get round a table and hash this out, that ultimately it is the rail passengers who are losing out.
It certainly is, and my goodness, £60,000 already for what doesn't seem to be the most skilled job in the world.
Oh, that's fighting talk. That's fighting talk.
Come at me, train drivers. But Sophie, thank you very much for bringing us that story live from Manchester Piccadilly.
Yes, don't tell the tube drivers what you make of their job, eh?
They open doors. They just press buttons and open doors. That's it.
Well, coming up, the Home Office is offering staff trigger support if they happen to read something that they might find, well, triggering. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, Storm Kathleen is on the way for this weekend, but it will be turning much warmer than it has been lately. The winds will also pick up. Here is Storm Kathleen developing out to the west of the UK. Ahead of that, we have got a weather front across northern areas. That's brought some snow earlier today. That's much turning to rain now as the temperatures start to pick up through the rest of the evening. Temperatures will rise as well from the southwest through the night, so it's going to be a very mild night, but there will be some very heavy rain for parts of Northern Ireland, much of Scotland as well for a time. Much of the rain should clear through by tomorrow morning, though, to leave a fairly dry start for the bulk of England and Wales. And as I said, it will be a very mild start to the day. Those temperatures are closer to the daytime average for this time of year. Throughout the day, across eastern areas of England, southeastern areas of Scotland, it should stay largely dry through the day. But Storm Kathleen is developing. It will push up to the west of the UK. There are wind warnings in force. There's likely to be some delays to travel across western areas of England, Wales and Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, some large waves as well. But in the east, where it stays fairly dry, there'll be highs of 22 degrees. Sunday's going to be another fairly mild day, but it will be more in the way of showers, particularly across western areas, Wales, northwestern England in particular, seeing some of those heavier showers, and it's going to stay windy in the far north. Next week, it does look like it's going to turn a little bit drier across southern areas. However, temperatures will fall a little more closer to average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers. sponsors of weather on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 5th of April.
GB News investigation now in an exclusive GB News investigation. We find that the Home Office has been offering trigger support to staff. What on earth could that be for? We'll fill you in very soon.
And civil servants walk out. Civil servants could refuse to work over fears they could be complicit in war crimes if Israel is found to have broken international law. Well, their union is considering taking legal action against the government despite their supposed political neutrality.
And Tory sex trap senior Conservative MP William Ragg has admitted his involvement in a honey trap sexting scandal targeting over a dozen senior Westminster figures. GB News has exclusive access to messages sent by the honey trap account.
Now, this is an interesting story. We were talking about it in the last hour, the idea that different groups, Just Stop Oil, Palestine Action, are all sort of merging together to make a super protest, as if they aren't annoying enough already.
Yes, it does seem. I mean, if we look at Greta Thunberg, for example, who is a professional protester, she often combines the issue in Gaza with the issue of climate change, which is curious. But I guess if you're going to be an activist, and you're going to dedicate your life to activism. You're going to try and find as many different causes to get behind, aren't you? But I am a little bit worried. So apparently this weekend there aren't any scheduled protests in London, and we know how many people turn up to these things, tens of thousands. I thought that maybe, considering the killing of 3 British aid workers, that perhaps there would be some kind of emergency protest this weekend, but we don't believe there is one. But these new protest laws have come into effect today. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any change in the policing.
You mentioned
protests.
Greta Thunberg. I just wanted to mention my favourite protest of hers.
Go on.
It was brilliant. So she loves the climate, of course. She also doesn't like Israel very much. But one of her other hobbies is the rights of indigenous people, particularly in Norway. And she campaigns for them so fervently that she campaigned to tear down a wind farm because it was built on indigenous land. Yes, that's climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, not even campaigning against a wind farm to stop it being built. No. She campaigned to tear down an existing wind farm because it was built on indigenous land.
Well, my advice would be, you know, stick to one thing. Stick to one thing.
Before they all start contradicting each other.
Then you'll avoid that embarrassment. But let us know what you make of it all. Are you worried about these different groups joining up to cause more of a storm? But first, your headlines.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes past 2, our top stories. Government security experts have been called in to analyse the WhatsApp messages at the heart of the Westminster sext scandal. So far, around a dozen MPs, staff and journalists are known to have been targeted, and sources have told GB News that more are coming forward. It's after Tory MP William Wragg told The Times he'd sent intimate pictures of himself to someone on a gay dating app and was then manipulated into providing phone numbers. He's expected to be contacted today and will be asked for a list of the numbers shared. The Met Police has also confirmed it's working with other forces over blackmail concerns. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says everyone needs to take cybersecurity seriously.
Well, I think the events of the last few days have been a great cause for concern. The MP involved has given a courageous and fulsome apology. But the lesson here for all MPs is that they need to be very careful about cybersecurity. And indeed, it's the lesson for members of the public as well, because this is something that we are all having to face in our daily lives.
Millions of people will receive a boost in take-home pay from tomorrow, following a cut to employee national insurance. From the start of the new tax year, Class 1 contributions will be reduced from 10 to 8%. Meanwhile, a further 2 million self-employed people will see their Class 4 national insurance reduced from 8 to 6%. The government says around 29 million workers will benefit from the changes. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, however, says taxes are actually going up.
While they say tomorrow that taxes are going down, all of the numbers show that taxes are on the rise. Taxes today are at a 70-year high, and they're due to increase in every single year of the forecast period. In fact, by the end of the forecast, the average British family would be paying £870 more in tax because of the frozen national insurance and income tax threshold, and because of increases in council tax too. That is the Conservatives' double whammy on tax.
ASLEF has accused the government of being economically incompetent as train drivers continue their strikes over pay. Union members have walked out and mounted picket lines across the country. Some areas have no train services today, with 5 train operators, including Avanti, Cross Country and West Midlands Railway, not running any services. A ban on overtime at 16 companies is also continuing into tomorrow. Mick Whelan says workers want a resolution.
We actually want somebody to come to the table and resolve this issue. The people behind me haven't had a pay rise for 5 years, half a decade. In the cost of living crisis, we're the same as any other worker. Regardless of what you earn, you feel that you have a right to demand a pay rise when you've got an economically incompetent government.
Consultants have accepted a pay offer from the government ending a year-long dispute. The British Medical Association says 83% of its members in England voted in favour of the offer, which is an improvement on one rejected earlier on this year. Consultants have taken strike action over the past 12 months, adding to the NHS waiting list, which has also been affected by the junior doctors' dispute, which remains unresolved. New powers to prevent so-called disruptive protests come into force today, with offenders facing up to 6 months in prison or an unlimited fine. Serious disruption prevention orders can now be used to stop repeat offenders from joining protest groups in particular areas at particular times. Home Secretary James Cleverly says these powers target those who are, quote, dedicated to wreaking havoc. However, civil liberties organisation Liberty has described it as a shameless attempt to prevent people from being able to make their voices heard. The Israeli military has dismissed 2 officers over the drone strikes which killed 7 aid workers on Monday, including 3 Brits. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby were among the World Central Kitchen workers who died. US President Joe Biden has warned Israel future support for the country depends on the steps taken to protect civilians and aid workers. Israel has since announced it's opening new routes for humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza, with the Erez crossing opening for the first time since the Hamas attacks in October. The King has reportedly told aides to ramp up plans for a 2-week state visit to Australia. King Charles is said to be over the moon and raring to go after his cancer treatment started positively. The 75-year-old is said to be feeling optimistic after he was able to meet members of the public on Easter Sunday. He reportedly told aides he's now supercharging plans to also visit New Zealand and Samoa. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, straight back to Tom and Emily.
The Home Office has been offering trigger support for staff reading about slavery, as it could remind them of past traumas and give them flashbacks, an investigation by GB News can reveal.
Yes, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is the newest member of the GB News team, GB News America video editor Stephen Edington. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us and for waking up in the morning early over there in the United States. Can you explain exactly what's going on here in this exclusive story?
So basically, Home Office staff are forced to have mandatory diversity and inclusion training. And I was passed some of this training on inclusion and belonging. And part of those documents, I noticed something quite interesting. There was a section called trigger support. And Home Office staff are told that they may be triggered, meaning that they experienced a past trauma, by things such as references to slavery and racism, whether that's through audio, text, or visual form. And to sort of resolve this, they have various employee helplines that they're also linked to, which are open 24/7, 365 days a year. And even more bizarrely, as you say, they even mention that they might get flashbacks from these triggers, these past traumas. Now, I don't know how many Home Office staff have been enslaved. I imagine it's a pretty low number. If they're talking about modern slavery, obviously that is a huge issue. But I think what they're referring to, or one suspects that what they're referring to, is past slavery. And as you know, Tom and Emily, many Brits were enslaved during the era of the Barbary pirates. Maybe we all have some past traumas there. We might have some flashbacks ourselves. So it is just part of that sort of general critical race theory ideology, I think, creeping into the Home Office.
I mean, Stephen, do you have an idea of how much this is all costing us, the taxpayer? Because you would expect this type of stuff from a second-rate university campus, perhaps, but not from the Home Office.
It's difficult to put a number on it. I think that where you can kind of calculate the hours lost to taxpayers, because these Home Office staff should be working on their day jobs. Obviously, they should be focused on controlling our borders. They should be focused on keeping us safe. And instead, they're thinking about past traumas. They're thinking about triggers, and perhaps they're even calling employee helplines. So I think that, again, this is part of that general waste in Whitehall, or this distraction from their main jobs. And there is this odd attitude where, and I think you see this in many public bodies, they see their purpose not as being serving the taxpayer or delivering for the public, but actually their purpose is staff welfare, and it's making sure that their mental health is perfect, that they have all sorts of activities that they can do in their job to make it more interesting. I mean, the other part of this story that I found out was that the Home Office intranet page, that's the internal internet site for Home Office staff, was also advertising various events over the last 2 months, which were all held during work hours. I can read some of the events if you like. Civil Service LGBT+ Network Manchester History Walk, Coming Out at Work Mental Health Impact, LGBT Liverpool Coffee Morning, and the End of History Month quiz. All of these events were held, as I say, during office hours. And one wonders why the Home Office, if one wonders why the Home Office is so dysfunctional and the results, Rishi Sunak isn't seeing results in terms of cutting illegal migration, cutting legal migration, then you need to look no further than some of these issues, because I think they are basically being distracted, or they're distracting themselves by focusing on things which are completely irrelevant to their day jobs.
And at the very least, you'd expect them to do this, you know, after work. If they want to go on an LGBT history walk, all power to them, just not during the working hours of the day. Stephen, how on earth is this all happening under a Conservative government?
It's a good question, Tom. I think that Conservative ministers have to take responsibility for all of these stories that I've reported on over the last few years. They are the ones who are able to immediately shut the stuff down if they wanted to. They have the power to do so. They had an 80-seat majority. I know it's been sort of whittled down.
But Stephen, isn't the problem here that in 2010, the Equality Act was passed? It was almost the last big piece of legislation from the Labour government of Gordon Brown. And doesn't the Equality Act actually demand lots of these things? So it would take a very brave Conservative administration to actually repeal that legislation that sort of demands a lot of these things that we're talking about.
Well, Tom, if you can point to the part of the Equality Act that says that public bodies have to have trigger support warnings, then I'd invite you to do so. Civil servants are taking the Equality Act and using it incorrectly. They're going beyond the compliance with the law, and they're inventing all of these woke initiatives. And they say that they are there in order to comply with the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty, which basically says that all public bodies have to foster a good relations between different protected characteristics. If that sounds like nonsense, I don't blame you at home. Basically, what it means is that they have to make an environment easy for people to work with who have sort of got a different gender or race or whatever, or sexuality. And that could encompass anything, right? But there's nothing specifically in the Equality Act that says they have to do any of these things. Basically, they have to make sure that people aren't being discriminated against for whatever their characteristic, whether they're white or black or gay or straight.
Or a vegan, as was found in a recent tribunal.
Absolutely. It seems odd, though. I mean, there's a great example of this in the Equality Act, which is protected, which is gender critical beliefs. But it seems odd to me that if the civil service believes that the Equality Act is why they have to set up all these initiatives, where are all the initiatives for straight white men? Where are all the networks for the straight white men? They completely exclude them, even though they are protected by the Equality Act.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen Edington there, who is our newest recruit to GB News, and he'll be based in Washington for us, bringing us the lowdown from America, where this madness is too. But it just takes on a life of its own, doesn't it, Tom?
Yeah.
All of these things. And I do wonder how many people have been recruited either as consultants or workshop managers or
diversity
people
managers
within the HR teams within, just to do this. It must be so much money that's spent on these types of initiatives. And also, what does being LGBT have to do with working in the Home Office? I mean, seriously, are they saying that people are discriminated on a daily basis in the Home Office because of their sexuality? I find that hard to believe. And would an LGBT walk help them? Do they need that? I imagine going to your manager and saying, oh, I just need 2 hours off because I want to go on this LGBT walk. The manager couldn't say no, because otherwise they'd be a bigot, wouldn't they?
Oh, of course, but if you wanted to go on, a Roman history walk, I'm just trying to think of the most straight male comparator. I
want to go on a turf walk, Tom. I want to go on a turf walk.
Where would you visit?
I don't know, but I'd find somewhere if it meant I could have a few hours off work.
Well, under the Equality Act, perhaps you can. Perhaps go. I mean, maybe I'll just go up down Paddington Basin right now. I mean, does the Equality Act allow me to just skip work? Can I?
Go on then, bye.
Okay.
Anyway, Stephen is going to bring us all sorts of exclusives just like this, and it is available in full for GB News members. You can see it at gbnews.com/membership, where there's lots of very interesting exclusive stories for you.
Right, I've decided to stay here. Now, civil servants within the Department for Business and Trade. This is another story involving civil servants now. These civil servants involved with arms exports have raised serious concerns over their own degree of legal liability if Israel is found to be violating international humanitarian law.
Yes, a union representing these civil servants said it is seriously considering taking legal action in relation to the UK's arms sales to Israel.
Well, joining us now is barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. And Stephen, a lot of people will say, aren't civil servants meant to be impartial? Wouldn't any liability for any political decision lie with the elected ministers in government rather than the so-called impartial civil service?
Yes, and it's crucial that that's the word you've gone to. The word is impartial. And we have started to forget what impartiality means. And to be perfectly honest, it's linked to your earlier story. The road to hell is always paved with good intentions. And we have forgotten what it is to be political and to say things which are political in order to support people like me. I'm bisexual. And so in order to make me feel included, apparently we've started to allow the civil servants to be political. Once you start doing that, impartiality collapses. That is the road to hell that is paved with those good intentions. The good intention of helping and being nice to people like me. I mean, I didn't get my bisexual martini on arrival, so I will be putting a Equality Act complaint in. But it is a good intention that we've allowed the civil servants to become political, but it is a wickedness because it is a breakdown in the system of our constitution, which requires impartiality, requires them to not be political at all, and requires them to be servants. And what they're doing is trying to become master, and that's what they do.
They're not comfortable, Stephen, with being servants, it seems. And don't worry, by the way, we will go for an LGBT walk a little later on, so don't worry. We are thinking of you and anyone else who feels like we're not, being kind enough. But, Stephen, these civil servants, they are unionised. Does that make a difference?
Well, one of the reasons that the unions have caused problems in this country, but they're actually a very successful mechanism in Germany. But our unions became very political, and they've stayed very political. And it may well be that that's one of the reasons unions are largely less successful in this country. They're smaller here, and they're across fewer industries. And they don't do things like in Germany, where they actually sit on the board with companies and work collaboratively, because they fell into what is Marxism in the 70s, and they don't really appear to have ever got out of it. And what is happening is that this is an assault on the Constitution. Once you lose the concept of impartiality, once civil servants are masters, and they're using, by the way, the excuse of international law. So this is a trick we've seen for years. I mean, I first came into British public life to point out that international law is not always binding on us. If international law was always binding on us, we would be its slaves. Okay, that's what we would be. We wouldn't be a democracy. Our votes wouldn't matter. Our governments would have no power. The previous treaties that some other government had agreed would bind us forever until our new masters let us go. No, 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 no. This country threw away its tyrants. In 1688, we've been tyrant-free since 1688, and that we will not have a fresh tyrant in international law. We control it. Our sovereign is Parliament. We are bound by domestic law. I mean, I noticed some years ago that domestic law started to become less cool. It's under sort of psychological attack at universities.
Stephen, I think you almost hit the nail on the head there, because some international law is absolutely put on a pedestal. However, not all international law. It was only last week that Germany legalised cannabis. Now, that was cheered from the rafters by many, many people, but it's actually in contravention of the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs 1961, an international treaty to which we're a party and Germany's a party, most countries in the world are a party to. Therefore, legalising cannabis breaks that international law. I didn't see civil servants therefore saying we're not going to enact this policy. It seems to apply to some policy more than others.
Yes, and that's the switcheroo. Once you start to allow them to do politics, they will do their politics, not your politics. And they will not complain about certain things. They are behaving inconsistently. I mean, I could show a number of other inconsistencies. Nobody seems in the slightest bit upset that the EU hasn't joined the ECHR, like it promised to, in a legally binding treaty. It's in breach of international law. And these things happen all the time. And as you say, quite rightly, no one complains. And it's only over certain things that we complain. And that's in order to get policy outcomes. And I'm afraid this nonsense about Israel being somehow involved in a genocide, which is just as law tosh, is not an excuse for civil servants to start behaving politically. If they want to, there will be good civil servants, and the good civil servants need to understand that if you restore impartiality, you protect civil servants from all of this nonsense.
Yeah, and protect their jobs too. I do wonder whether some of these civil servants would do better running for Parliament and having some accountability. But thank you very much indeed, Stephen Barrett. Really great to speak to you on the legal issues here.
Absolutely. I always love it when we talk to someone who brings up the glorious revolution of 1688, the foundation of our liberty. Well, coming up, brand new analysis showing a shocking number of schools misrepresent laws protecting sex and gender. Well, more on those details after this short break.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
TfL bosses have come under fire after banning an advert... Oh, God. They've banned an advert for a comedy show because it had a hot dog on it, because that supposedly promotes obesity.
The comedian Ed Gamble has swapped the image of the fast food favourite in favour of a cucumber instead. And there's the cucumber on the plate.
So is the UK turning into a nanny state? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, and nutritionist Olivia Parry. Good to see you both this morning. Olivia, it's a comedy show. He's not promoting eating hot dogs, is he? Is this just a load of nonsense?
The thing is, we have a huge problem with overweight and obesity in this country. We're fourth in Europe. It's big business. Advertising for food companies is big business. They make so much money. You just have to switch on primetime TV to watch, food after food advertisements. And it's for the youngsters as well, who don't have the nutritional education. We're not taught cookery in school anymore. People go to college and to university, they don't know how to cook.
But
and it leads
forgive me for jumping in, Olivia. Forgive me for jumping in, but the whole point with this is it's an advert for a comedy show.
Yes, I know, but this is a wider issue.
I think it's a load of old tosh, to be quite honest with you. It's a hot dog. In fact, I wish they'd have put onions on the hot dog. A bit of what you fancy won't hurt you. You should eat 80-20 anyway. We talk about a nanny state. I actually think, arguably, we're becoming an authoritarian state. Opinions, banned. Comedy, banned. The England flag, banned. It's like we've got to wear a virtual muzzle.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, it's 2:26 and a mother has alleged that she discovered at a parent-teacher meeting that her daughter now defines herself as a boy. The mother says the school had started using male pronouns to refer to the 13-year-old without even telling her.
Well, this comes as a survey of equality and transgender policies at more than 600 schools in Devon and Cornwall showed a large majority reportedly misrepresented equality laws.
Yes, some of the school policies reportedly claim children as young as 5 could show signs of gender dysphoria. Well, joining us now to discuss this is the founder of Our Duty Group, Keith Jordan. Keith, the government seems to have been clear, but perhaps they haven't been clear enough, that schools do need to tell parents if their child is claiming to be a boy when they're biologically a girl. Is that not right?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the government has not been clear enough. The draft guidance was published about 2 months ago, which was open for consultation, and the consultation on that has closed. And that draft guidance, in my view and in the view of many others, did not go far enough in making it absolutely clear that schools should not be socially transitioning, which is the word we use to describe allowing children to go by pronouns and names not associated with their sex. Schools should not be allowing children to be socially transitioning at school. But that was not made abundantly clear in the draft guidance that went out. It was certainly made clear that schools should not be doing it, but the guidance really needed to say that schools must not do it.
What do you mean by schools doing it? Because there are some instances of children in the United Kingdom, say someone who's 16 who is transitioning, as a matter of legal fact, is transitioning. There are some individuals under the age of 18 who are doing that, who attend schools. Are you saying that schools should actively work against that?
My personal view is that schools should actively work against that. You're absolutely right that legally we have got gender reassignment as a protected characteristic in the Equality Act, which makes the terrain very difficult for schools to navigate. The legislation implies that there is a legitimacy if given to a child identifying out of their natural sex. And I would like to raise the question, should we be giving that idea that a child gets in their head, the legitimacy that we are giving it? Because I've been working with families affected by this for 6 or 7 years now. And we've formed quite a clear picture of how this manifests itself in teenagers. And it really boils down to these children getting the idea in their head, and then they ruminate on it for a long time. And personally, from the experiences I've had, from the parents I've spoken to, from clinical psychologists I've spoken to, these children who say they are transgender doesn't actually mean that they're transgender.
I mean, Keith, one of the key things for me with all this is whether teachers should tell parents. Now, I think it should absolutely be the case in nearly 100% of cases that if teachers suspect that a child is presenting themselves as a different gender without their parents even knowing, that they should be on the phone to the parents immediately. It's a safeguarding issue. It's something that parents must know. But some people argue, well, hang on, what if the child has come to you in confidence and told the teacher, you know what, I'm feeling gender dysphoria, would you mind calling me she instead of he? I can't tell my parents because they're transphobic or whatever. Can it be a bit tricky for teachers? Because they want to look after the child, don't they?
Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, there's a duty of care from schools, from educational professionals to always act in the best interests of the child. Also, you rightly point out to safeguarding. And one key aspect of safeguarding is there should not be secrets. The default position should always be to tell the parents.
Hang on, Keith. Keith, if you say there should be never be secrets, what if a child tells a teacher that they trust, for example, that they're gay, and their families might be incredibly religious, their families might be not accepting of that fact? Do you think in that situation the teacher must tell the parents?
I don't. If a child is gay, there isn't a health risk associated with that. And
you're not demanding anyone call you by a different pronoun, are you? You're not arguing for someone to change the way that they treat you in school.
Exactly. Yeah. So coming out as gay is not a safeguarding issue. Coming out as transgender is a safeguarding issue.
But doesn't the safeguarding issue apply at home as well as at school? In fact, the majority of the child's time will be at home. And if a teacher has just outed a child to their parents and those parents are not accepting, that could be a very dangerous situation.
I hear what you're saying, but what you'll find is a lot of children will say, oh, don't tell my parents because they're transphobic, as just a means of avoiding the conversation that they really should be having with their parents. We must assume that in the vast majority of cases, parents have the best interests of their children at heart.
And teachers are not the parents. Teachers are not the parent. I'm really sorry to butt in there, Keith, but we've run out of time. But it's been really great to get your perspective. Keith Jordan, the founder of Our Duty Group. I think we'll come back to this a little bit. More to say on that. We'll get the news headlines, but coming up, it's understood dozens of MPs. We're going to come back to the honey trap scandal too, so do stay tuned.
Good afternoon. 2:33, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Our top stories. Human remains have been found wrapped in plastic at a nature reserve in Salford. Greater Manchester Police says a murder investigation has been launched following the discovery by a member of the public at Kersaldale. Now, we're expecting an update from the force in half an hour, and we'll bring you more on this developing story. Now, government security experts have been called in to analyse WhatsApp messages at the heart of the Westminster sext scandal. So far, around a dozen MPs, staff and journalists are known to have been targeted, and sources have told GB News more are coming forward. It's after Tory MP William Wragg told The Times he'd sent intimate pictures of himself to someone on a gay dating app and was then manipulated into providing those contacts. He's expected to be contacted today and will be asked for the list of numbers which he shared. The Met Police has also confirmed it's now working with other forces over these blackmail concerns. Consultants have accepted a pay offer from the government, ending a year-long dispute. The British Medical Association says 83% of members in England voted in favour of the offer. That's an improvement on one rejected earlier this year. Consultants have been striking over the past 12 months, adding to the NHS waiting list, which has also been affected by the junior doctors' dispute, which remains unresolved. Millions of people will receive a boost in take-home pay from tomorrow, following a cut to employee national insurance. From the start of the new tax year, Class 1 contributions will be reduced from 10% to 8%. Meanwhile, a further 2 million self-employed people will see their Class 4 national insurance reduced from 8% to 6%. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Much of the rain will clear to showers through the rest of the day. We'll start to feel a little bit warmer, but Storm Kathleen will arrive through the night, so it's going to be a warm but very windy weekend. Storm Kathleen is waiting in the wings. This is an area of low pressure slowly starting to fill, and that will start to ease much of the rain we've seen through this morning. So across many southern areas of England and Wales, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers. Across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, they will still see some quite heavy bursts of rain through the rest of the day. It's still quite cold across the far north of Scotland, but further south, although we've got quite a brisk southerly wind, it is a warm direction. We could see highs of 18 or 19 degrees in the southeast. Well, that's where the best of the sunshine will be. This evening, the next band of rain will arrive into parts of the southwest, and that will push up northwards through the night, and it will bring with it these very strong winds. This is Storm Kathleen to the west of the UK, some very strong gusts. The winds will be particularly strong through the daytime on Saturday, but it will mean we are at a very mild start on Saturday morning, so lows of only 12 or 13 degrees in some places. The rain will push northwards, mainly affecting northwestern areas through the day. Actually, across the east, it should stay largely dry, but there are wind warnings in force for Northern Ireland and many west coasts of Scotland, Wales and England. You can see gusts of 60, possibly 70 miles per hour here, so there could be some travel disruption. But in any of the sheltered sunshine in the east, we could see highs of 22 degrees. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Cumbria, firstly, northbound M6 is queuing, 2 lanes shut from Shap up to Penrith, 39 to 40. A collision being dealt with. Long delays, anti-clock M60 at the turn for the East Lancs Road, junction 14, 2 lanes out for a breakdown queuing, back to 18 at Simister Island. A couple of issues in Somerset for the northbound M5, Wellington up to Taunton, northbound 26 to 25 queuing, part blocked. An accident being dealt with. There's one as well, northbound Western-super-Mare up to Clevedon, 21 to 20, that's queuing and part blocked as well. Still delays clockwise M25, Staines at 13 to the M4 at 15, following an earlier bump, and queuing north up the M11 after Bishop Stortford at 8, 2 miles accused for an earlier collision there this afternoon. And for now, that's your very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 2:38. Now, we were just having a discussion a little bit earlier about whether teachers should have to tell parents if a child is turning up at school and presenting as a different gender or saying they have gender dysphoria. Andrew says teachers are not healthcare professionals, so should not be in a position where they determine if a child has gender dysphoria and or participate in social transition just because a child says they are transgender. I think that's a very good point, because you get into such murky waters. Should it be up to a single teacher or a collection of teachers to decide whether it's okay or appropriate for a child to essentially to affirm their gender dysphoria and say, you are a boy, OK, we'll treat you as a boy if they were actually a girl?
How can it be up to anyone apart from the individual concerned?
But they're a child. They're a child. We don't let children. Some schools have been given litter trays to children in the classroom because they've said they're cats.
Have they really?
Apparently so. At least on one occasion.
If that is true.
But you're indulging it, right? Because it could be
beyond ridiculous.
But if a child comes into school and they say, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, can you call me he, she? Do you think the teacher should just say, OK, and we don't even have to tell your parents?
I think actually what Keith Jordan, who we were talking to in the interview beforehand, said, almost let the cat out of the bag. He said in the vast majority of cases, the parents should be informed. That is almost conceding that there are some cases, not all cases, but some cases where actually the safeguarding option would be to not out someone to deeply intolerant parents.
But some children, yeah, but what about the other children in the classroom? Because this is the other issue. because it's a safeguarding issue. So it's not just pronouns, is it? It's then where do they do sports? Do they use changing rooms? Do they use different toilets than they were? And then that affects more children, doesn't it? And then you have parents of other children getting involved and saying, hang on here, this boy isn't a girl, or vice versa.
Yeah,
and you get into very murky waters.
It was a girl who was transitioning to be a boy. But I think one of the issues here is this is so fantastically rare. This is not something that occurs in every school. This is not something that occurs in every class.
Well, there have been schools where there have been huge numbers, a very high proportion of students saying that they are of a different gender.
Yes, and
that's why the social contagion element sometimes comes.
And if there is a huge group of people in one class doing that, then perhaps more scepticism should be applied, absolutely. But I think if we're trying to make universalist rules here, we're going to make some mistakes, and it has to be individualised.
I think teachers should certainly show compassion to their students, but I do think parents do need to know. Moving on, it is understood that dozens of MPs, parliamentary staff and journalists have all been affected by the honey trap sexting scandal that is rocking Westminster. This number is expected to rise as more people come forward.
Yes, meanwhile, the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has called in security experts to get a better understanding of these WhatsApp messages, some of which we have exclusively revealed this afternoon on GB News, all part of this honey trap scandal.
Shall we discuss this further now with GB News political editor Christopher Hope? Thank you very much indeed, Chris. So what's going on then? The Speaker has called in a security expert.
That's right, it's quite quiet in Parliament today. We're in the middle of a long Easter holiday. MPs aren't back till a week on Monday when the Rwanda bill is back in front of the Commons and Lords. That'll be a dramatic week, but right now it's very becalmed over in Parliament. That's right, the Speaker wrote to MPs and staff last night, making clear they're talking to security experts from the government, partners in government, to analyse and understand the nature and any security risk from these messages sent out in a fishing expedition. It's quite interesting tracking the different political reaction to this issue involving William Wragg. He, of course, he said how sorry he is. He was very weak. He shouldn't have shared numbers with these people, who then sent come-on messages to other MPs and staff. Some MPs replied with images of themselves in a compromising position. So he is very, very sorry. He's expected today to give a full list of the numbers he gave out to Commons authorities so they can be contacted and protect themselves. But the reaction politically has been interesting. Here's the first reaction from the Tories. This is Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor.
Well, I think the events of the last few days have been a great cause for concern. The MP involved has given a courageous and fulsome apology. But the lesson here for all MPs is that they need to be very careful about cyber security. And indeed, it's the lesson for members of the public as well, because this is something that we are all having to face in our daily lives.
There we have Jeremy Hunt saying it was a courageous and fulsome apology. In a sense, the Tories putting their arm round William Wragg, and that's in some contrast to his opponent, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. Here's what she had to say.
It's incredibly concerning, the revelations that we've heard overnight. The police are now looking into this. That is right, and the police investigation should be able to take its course.
But what do you want to see happen to Wragg? Should he resign?
Well, that's a question for the Conservatives. The police investigation is now underway, and it is right that we allow that investigation to take its course.
I get you don't want to talk about Wragg specifically, but how concerned are you in general about the vulnerability of MPs to blackmail?
Well, I'm very concerned about what seems to have happened in this incident, especially about MPs' telephone numbers being passed on to unknown sources. That is really concerning, and that is right that there is a proper investigation into this. In positions of responsibility, we always have to think about our actions, but there are also malevolent players out there who are trying to influence politics in these benign ways.
You have Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, with, I would say, contrasting responses to the William Wragg situation, which might be interesting, I think, to viewers and listeners. Should we be sympathetic towards William Wragg? He's had issues with mental health in recent years. Or should we be firmer, maybe, as Rachel Reeves saying, the matter of the whip, which has not been taken away from Rachel Reeves, from William Wragg, forgive me, is up to the Tory party to judge?
Now, it's a really concerning issue, given that there are so many people in Westminster clearly that have been messaged. More than a dozen, we understand. And the Times reporting that 2 members of Parliament have sent explicit pictures of themselves.
That's right. We don't know if they're men or women because there were 2 kind of fake people called Abby and Charlie messaging people, a man and a woman. So we don't know the gender of the MPs who may have sent pictures of themselves. Yeah, but it shows how people are prone if weak people can be affected by this. It might be surprising to some of us, but it does affect people. I think William Ragg's response is quite telling. He said there that they had compromising things on me. They wouldn't leave me alone. I've hurt people by being weak. I was scared. I'm mortified that my weakness has caused people hurt. I think that indicates how some people can push into a corner by the pressure which these spear-phishing people do, the pressure they put on to give me something that you've got. And some people can crack under that pressure, and that's certainly where William Ragg found himself. Right now, he's in Greater Manchester. As I say, the police and the authorities from the government and Parliament will be in touch, asking for a full list of numbers. As we understand it from common sources, that number is rising. More are coming forward of people affected by this. Of course, 2 police forces, the Met Police and so far Leicestershire Police investigating. So it's an unravelling situation as we speak.
No, really, really concerning stuff for national security, if nothing else. But Chris Hope, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest on this scandal.
Thank you. Well, coming up, shocking figures. Burglary victims are having to wait up to 28 hours just for police to arrive at the scene of the crime. How did we get here? We'll be asking a former police officer.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Danny, there's an irony here, isn't there? And that is this. On the one hand, the BBC expect older viewers to cough up more, and yet every opinion poll in the land shows us, Danny, that older people are the least satisfied with the service they get.
Well, the BBC don't give a damn about older people because, as I discovered when I was binned for being 50 and white from the BBC in the Midlands to diversify the lineup, they're after a younger audience because the longevity of the institution, that's the BBC, Martin, relies on the next generation of licence fee payers. And this is quite important, and it's a great point that you've raised. Anybody who's over the age of 50, certainly 60, the BBC doesn't care about you because they're interested in attracting the next generation of licence fee payers. And when those 25-year-olds that they're after at the moment become 40 and 45, they'll stop caring about them too. Otherwise, the BBC just won't exist. It relies on new blood, if you like, when it comes to the licence fee. So that's a great point. They just don't care about middle-aged people.
And yet, they're now floating the idea of older people paying more. How would that work? Would it be means tested?
I know if ever you wanted to satisfy your curiosity that the BBC had a socialist agenda, it's the fact that they want the proletariat to pay more, to not pay, and the bourgeoisie to pick up the bill. This is classic Marxism for you. I know we're treating this lightly, Martin, but how would they means test you? Are you going to have to provide evidence of your bank account? And of course, people's financial situation, they change. You know, people's finances are fluid. So one year you may be what they class as wealthy, and then the next year you're not. So it's a situation that I find just impossible. How it's going to work, I just don't know. It's something that I just don't feel happy about.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Right, well, before we move on, I'd like to issue a retraction of what I suggested about litter trays being in some schools, because they weren't. But a school had to send a letter to parents insisting that they did not have litter trays for children. But there have been rumours, at least, and an audio clip that suggested at one point that there may be litter trays, or at least that children were identifying as cats. So there you go.
These stories sort of run off with a sort of a mind of their own, don't they, sometimes? Outside of the realm of reality.
But please do let us know if your child identifies as a cat, because you never know. You never know.
It's not a real thing.
I identified as a dinosaur at one point.
Did you?
No.
What sort of dinosaur would you... the conversation's for another time.
T-Rex, Tom.
Amazing. Great dinosaur. Diplodocus. No, burglary victims are having to wait up to 28 hours for police to arrive at the scene of the break-in. That's according to findings from the Liberal Democrats.
Yes, waiting times for a police officer have almost doubled in 2 years, with average burglary response times increasing by a shocking 25% in just 1 year.
Well, let's speak to the former London police officer and director of the Law and Order Foundation, Norman Brennan. Norman, are you surprised by these figures?
Not at all. We have a criminal justice system in absolute crisis. Wasn't perfect in my day, but in my day, every 999 call we got, we attended. Every burglary victim that we were told about, if there were suspects on premises, we'd send as many officers as we could as quickly as possible. When the suspects were off, it would be slightly downgraded, but we certainly get round within hours that day with a scenes of crime officer and police officers to reassure the individuals. Some were elderly, some were single parents that needed some help, advice on what to do about the broken windows and doors. We arranged all that. Nowadays, they're lucky to get anyone, as we see in, for at least 24 hours.
I mean, Norman, if you're waiting up to 28 hours for the police to arrive on the scene of a burglary, it's highly unlikely that the police will find the perpetrator.
Absolutely not. I mean, the thing is, what happens, folks, is this, is when domestic violence, robbery, burglary, fights, knife crime become a priority, nothing's a priority. This government crippled policing 13, 14 years ago. Just when I retired, we lost 22,000 frontline officers, 27,000 backroom staff. And I'm ashamed to say, as someone that's dedicated their life to policing and law and order, is that the criminals then took over the streets and they still rule the streets. And I can tell you briefly, only speaking to a police contact this morning, a few days ago in Hampshire, a woman on her own, early hours of the morning, 3 children, 3 masked thugs broke into her house, stole keys to a number of electric bikes, damaged her car and had it on their toes. In absolute fraught bereftness of anger, frustration and worry, she called 999. Nobody turned up. This happens too often. It's unacceptable. And when you look at where we point the finger, unfortunately, this government, the previous government, and I tell you what, I've got no hope of either of these two parties tackling this type of crime. And don't forget, residential burglary, 14 years maximum penalty imprisonment. Commercial is 10 years. We're told 2 weeks ago not to send people to prison to up to a year. That includes a lot of those people. And yesterday, your programme said, let's go softer on those who've had a bad life. Well, I had a bit of a bad start, as many other people did. Do you know what I did? I rolled my sleeves up, made that extra effort, joined the police. And I'm
we
ashamed.
applaud you for it, Norman. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the show, but thank you so much for what you've had to say. Really important stuff. Norman Brennan there. Martin Daubney's up next. Martin, what's coming up?
Well, there's yet another pro-Palestine march at Parliament Square. Starts in about 10 minutes. It's the last Friday of Ramadan. There's a pro-Israel counter-demo. 500 extra coppers on the streets will be live from the front lines. The honeypot sex scandal. Are MPs a victim of their own stupidity? We'll have all of that on my show, 3 till 6. But first, it's time for your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, Storm Kathleen is on the way for this weekend, but it will be turning much warmer than it has been lately. The winds will also pick up. Here is Storm Kathleen developing out to the west of the UK. Ahead of that, we have got a weather front across northern areas. That's brought some snow earlier today. That's much turning to rain now as the temperatures start to pick up through the rest of the evening. Temperatures will rise as well from the southwest through the night, so it's going to be a very mild night, but there will be some very heavy rain for parts of Northern Ireland, much of Scotland as well for a time. Much of the rain should clear through by tomorrow morning, though, to leave a fairly dry start for the bulk of England and Wales. And as I said, it will be a very mild start to the day. Those temperatures are closer to the daytime average for this time of year. Throughout the day, across eastern areas of England, southeastern areas of Scotland, it should stay largely dry through the day. But Storm Kathleen is developing. It will push up to the west of the UK. There are wind warnings in force. There's likely to be some delays to travel across western areas of England, Wales and Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, some large waves as well. But in the east, where it stays fairly dry, there'll be highs of 22 degrees. Sunday's going to be another fairly mild day, but it will be more in the way of showers, particularly across western areas, Wales, northwestern England in particular, seeing some of those heavier showers, and it's going to stay windy in the far north. Next week, it does look like it's going to turn a little bit drier across southern areas. However, temperatures will fall a little more closer to average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.